If everybody, 100% of people who could get vaccinated did get vaccinated, COVID would have died in 3 months.
No, that's not clear at all.
Math is the math, Rob. It's just a math question.
Your math is wrong.
No, don't
Not
that
right-wing.
everybody that agrees with you,
Left.
you call world renowned. Everybody who doesn't, you have a name.
Scientists who are sensible, okay? There
Oh,
are plenty of...
so the ones that agree with you are sensible, and the ones who don't are not. Do you think the only possible explanation, the only reason that they ignored it is because they had a narrative they had to fill?
It's because the White House was pressuring the FDA to approve the COVID vaccines as soon as possible so they could mandate it for the military. Clearly, you did not read everything. Otherwise, you would
No,
have
I
come with
read
different...
everything that came up on Archive. Everything, because I was...
You read Jay Bhattacharya's papers?
Yes, I read them all.
And you weren't convinced by that?
No.
I'm proposing to you to not use the term DEI because DEI is not your
I'm going
term.
to use it all day. All day, every
DEI was
day.
not invented. Stop fixating on race and gender as your goals.
You know what, Rob? If you were better at all that than they are, you'd have 500 employees. You've got a business. Why isn't your business bigger?
Well, hello, Mark.
What's up, Rob? How are you?
Good. You?
Another day in paradise.
Thanks for agreeing to do this.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Looking forward to it.
I'm surprised you said yes.
Why? We can disagree on things. I like people who disagree with me.
So a bit of background between you and me. So we had a fairly long email exchange a couple years ago on COVID mandates, mRNA vaccine side effects, the bioethics of mandates, and the government response to COVID. And I never talked about this really publicly up until Joe mentioned on his show, on his podcast, Joe Rogan. So he organized that sort of informal email debate after you guys had a pretty strong disagreement on COVID, and you were criticizing him pretty heavily on his COVID commentary, and then you guys were going back and forth, and Joe asked me to chime in, and we had a long correspondence.
Yeah, he hasn't talked to me since.
I'd love to get into that and what we see in retrospect, and if your opinion has changed on some of those things, and what we make of all that.
Yeah, it really hasn't.
Okay. Well, we'll have an interesting debate then on that. But first, I thought we'd open the discussion on DEI and wokeness. That appears to be one of a few major topics where we have a lot of disagreement on. And I'd really like this conversation to be a good faith effort to try and talk about some of these very contentious hot button issues, which a lot of people have strident disagreement on. And from what I've seen from you, we disagree on a lot of these things. And so I'd love to see if we can find common ground, or if someone can change someone's mind. But from what I've seen,
I don't know what your positions on all these things are, but I'm happy to share mine.
Yeah. So we can start with DEI and wokeness. And so from what I've seen from you on this topic, I sense there's a lot of confusion on your part, ideological confusion on this issue. And I see you advocating for a certain kind of DEI that is not really what DEI is about. And you articulate some of these very high-minded, sometimes very noble visions of DEI being about including people, the importance of helping marginalized communities, having diverse perspectives in particular. You've talked a lot about that. So why don't you first articulate your view on DEI
Sure.
and why you support it?
DEI is really simple. It's what I've used in my businesses. Diversity is going out there and looking and including diverse populations in your hiring practices, looking where other people don't look, which I think is smart for any business to do. You know, most companies don't spread a wide net as they look for potential employees. And the wider the net you can spread, the more diverse that net you can spread, you're going to find, diamonds in the rough. You're going to find better people because, in many cases, you may be the only one looking where other people aren't. So that's diversity to me, looking where other people aren't and finding the most qualified candidates, always based on merit. Equity means once you hire somebody, put them in a position to succeed. Very, very simple. And inclusion means I don't care what they look like, what they call themselves, how they gender themselves. whoever you are, I hired you because you were the best, and we're going to respect you in the workplace. That's DEI. That's, it's worked for me well in business. When I go out and talk to organizations about DEI, that's the message that I convey. Nobody really disagrees with me. When I talk to CEOs about it, they look at it and say, yeah, that's the right way to do it. That's what we're trying to do. When I talk to, any type of company that, wants to be as successful as possible, that's why they bring me in to talk. They don't bring me in to talk philosophy. They don't bring me in to talk about the law. They bring me in to say, okay, we want to be more profitable. We want to run a better company. You were very supportive of DEI. Tell me why. And I tell them just what I told you.
So the problem with what you're saying is that that's not what DEI is. At least that's not what the activists and the people who support DEI say it is, and also the conservative critics also.
What activists do has nothing to do. DEI is part of a business, right?
Uh-huh.
It's for business, correct?
And universities.
Well, that's different, right? I'm talking as it relates to businesses. Well, universities are one world, and we can talk about those separately. And I've always said, what happens in a university as it applies to what they do, there's a whole different world. But no one gives a shit what an activist thinks when they're running their business. No one cares. I couldn't even name any of the activists because I don't care, and they don't matter. Never have mattered to a business, never will matter to a business, because what matters is the bottom line. If you can align the interests of your company and what creates profits with your employees and make it so your employees like coming to work, the culture's good, and people, feel like they can contribute to the overall goal.
Yeah.
That's what DEI contributes to. It's really straightforward and simple.
There's a few problems with what you're saying. First of all, optics matters in a business. From a lot of your positions on DEI, like the culture has changed in the last several months, even with the election of Trump. Culture is definitely moving rightward. The popularity of podcasts and independent media, a lot of conservative voices now are more and more getting more and more attention. But there's, of course, been this perception, especially in the wake of George Floyd, at the height of this hysteria on race relations in America, that I think and many others have observed to be fairly skewed from the reality of what is happening with race relations. There has been this problem and this perception among CEOs that we have to cave to these, woke far left dictates and positions on increasing diversity and inclusivity and equity at their companies. And if they don't do that, or if for whatever reason they come under the spotlight for not having equal representation among certain race groups, only certain ones and not other ones, weirdly enough, but we can talk about that. But if we don't have equal representation among certain groups, say men and women or Black Americans, 13% of our company isn't Black Americans, then we could come under the spotlight and be attacked as being racist. That's a real problem. And do you see that as being a real issue?
How often do you look at EEOC documents?
Okay, not often.
Ever?
It's been a while.
Never. So lots of talk about.
I wrote a lot about race in 2020, 2021. I haven't written a lot about race relations and companies in the last couple of years, but go on.
I continue to look at EEOC documents because not all companies publish them. Most, I think, a big chunk have to file them. And when you look at the EEOC documents, they give you real data, and they tell you not what a company talks about, not what people talk about as it relates to a company, but exactly what they do. And so you get to see their hiring by demographics. Now they've changed the rules now with Caroline Lucas there, but and removed some things, but it was all right there. And so all the companies that got shit for, hey, your DEI program for hiring, you set these quotas, the numbers don't match the narrative. And so that's what I paid attention to. And look, it was financially rewarding to call out companies. When I say financially rewarding, not that people were getting paid when they did it, but it built an audience and it built, it built interest in programming and podcasts and the like, and that leads to sponsors and downloads and all that. But what I'm telling you, Rob, is when I look at the EEOC data, you don't see a reflection that companies introduce quotas because those big companies also have legal counsel. They have general counsel and legal departments that know that quotas are illegal. Now that doesn't mean they can't set goals, doesn't mean they can't talk to goals. And where you're right is that there's a lot of virtue signaling that goes on depending on what happens, right? And, during COVID and, 5-6 years ago, there was a ton of virtue signaling that we want to hire more, we want to set our goals at this level, and we want to go out and try to, just improve, what's the right word? And we want to, try to understand how we can make our companies more profitable using these approaches. And so lots of talk. And now it's the opposite, right? It's like, no, we don't do that. We don't do DEI. We don't do any of that stuff, and they change the literature. They do the search and replace, and they remove things. They remove titles, again, on the corporate side. But culturally, it's not really changing.
So
Culturally, it's not changing at all because they know it's good for business.
okay, so I'm disagreeing with some things you're saying, and I'll circle back on that in a second. But are you agreeing with me that racial quotas are wrong?
They're illegal. They're always wrong because they're illegal.
Violates
they're illegal.
It violates Title VII.
Every big company knows that. But what happens is you get people who say, "Look at that company. They said, it's like that video that what's his name, James, whatever his name is,
James Lindsay,
watch around with the video camera, right?" And he said, they had a guy from IBM saying, and I'm doing this from memory, we're going to have, here's our goal. Here's our mission. We want to have, representation so that we reflect America. Okay, they didn't say they're not, that doesn't mean it's a quota. That doesn't mean they're hiring somebody who's less qualified, because at some point when you hire people that are less qualified, the company suffers, even big companies, because it's not just a matter of can they absorb somebody who's incompetent or less capable, they're big. It's more, nobody wants to work with them, and particularly, 5-6 years ago when people were getting checks and, it was in companies were paying to keep people, that it just wasn't happening the way it was being described. Both sides try to virtue signal, and the same thing is happening now. Oh no, don't do DEI, and we don't do that stuff anymore, when they don't really change anything.
So in 2020, as everyone knows, a number of high-profile companies made these racial Black Lives Matter affiliated pledges. I pulled up a few examples. Everyone knows about this, but Starbucks, Meta, Pfizer, increasing minority representation to 30%, doubling the number of Black and Latinx.
Did they do it? Did you look at the EEOC numbers to see if they did it?
So a lot of these companies after walked this back, and we can get to that, but I'm just talking about the concept here of having these goals. Companies like Pfizer, Microsoft, and Starbucks,
is not a
American
quota,
Airlines, United Airlines.
Goal is not a quota.
Yes, I'm granting that. So are you saying you support that goal, or we want to double the amount of Black senior leaders at this company, or we want to double the BIPOC, whatever the hell that means,
to make that
representation at our company?
In the United States of America, and that's the way capitalism works. If you want to make a product for $10 and sell it for $3 and lose money on every sale, that is up to you. If you
that's
want
not what I'm talking about. I'm asking for an opinion.
You think you want people, when it comes to vaccines, people get to make their individual choices, but when it comes to companies, they don't get to make their individual choices.
That's not what I'm saying. No, I'm just asking for your opinion.
Okay.
Right? Is it ethical and sensible and maybe even feasible to have these goals of you want to double your Black employees at some physics lab or chemistry lab, or in this pharmaceutical company, we want double the amount of women, for example? It
depends on the company and the culture and the organization. If you have no women in the company at all, right, and you want, you decided that that's a mistake, that you historically have made mistakes. If you have no Black employees because historically, you excluded Black employees for whatever reason, and you just hadn't got whatever, right? Okay, you make the decision to try to improve, to go out and hire and find people that are the most qualified people, and hopefully they're Black. And so you set a goal. You're going to interview, the way I looked at that is, before maybe you interview 10 people to get one. And that one, you typically went through the same places to hire, and those places were all predominantly white. And that's more likely because, like you said, only 13% of the population is black. So if you spread your wings and spread the net so that you're going someplace where there's, now you're interviewing or going where, there are more black candidates, well, there's an increasing likelihood that out of all those black candidates, you're going to find somebody that's the most qualified. Same with women, same with any demographic. You want left-handed people, if you interview enough left-handers, one of them is going to be the most qualified. And
but this is not what we're talking about. This is not what these companies.
That's the way business works, Rob. That is the way business works. You go out there and
that's what you're saying. That's not what Starbucks and Amazon and Meta, again, some of these companies that walked us back recently. That's not what they said.
Google right now. Go Google their EEOC reports and see what they actually did. What was the net result of their action?
Yes, a lot of companies walked back their.
No, I don't think they walk back. It's hard to do those things. You can set all the goals you want. Doesn't make them quotas. They're not dumb. They know quotas are illegal. You can't give a preference to somebody based off their color, race, creed, whatever it may be. That is illegal. But if you go to, instead of just going to a school that happens to be 97% white, you go to a school that happens to be 97% black, do you think that's wrong?
If they're solely picking people based on merit,
no, that's not what I asked you. That's not what I asked you, right? Is it okay to go to, is it okay to go to a school that happens to be 100% black? Can you recruit there?
There's nothing inherently wrong with that.
Right. That's what I've said. That's what I told you. That is what DEI is. As long as you're going out and hiring. So if all of a sudden someone says, Starbucks, whoever says, we need to increase the number of black employees that we have. And to do that, we're not going to use quotas. We're going to evaluate and analyze where we've been looking to find candidates for our company. And we're going to go extend the number of candidates, go to places now that instead of being predominantly white, because, just the numbers say that if, 70% of the workforce is white, then where you go to hire, most likely it's going to be white. And if 13% is black of the population, most likely the places you're going to go to look for candidates are going to be predominantly white. Are you going to agree with that?
The problem is you're talking about something very different than what these companies have talked about.
I'll tell you how business works, Rob. Let me get to the whole point. So I asked you a question again. Do you agree that most places companies are going to interview or look for candidates other than online, right? That you are going to see predominantly white people apply if that source of candidates is predominantly white. That's just where it goes. The numbers are the numbers. The math is the math. And if you go now, and particularly if you haven't done it in the past, if you're like, damn, why don't we interview at HBCUs? You go to HR. Hey, HR, why have we never interviewed at HBCUs? Why? Well, I don't know. I haven't gone to those schools. Okay, so now CEO makes the decision. We are going to go to more HBCUs. That is going to increase the number of black, maybe Hispanic applicants. We're going to go to more community colleges. That's going to increase the number of black.
So this is all independent of race. This is not what DEI advocates. Yes, it is.
This is exactly what DEI is. Just because you don't like it, doesn't mean it's not right, Rob. It's exactly what it is. And so what happens is when you expand your net, so you include people who don't look like you, right?
That's great. That's great.
That's right. As long as you hire the most qualified person. Now, let me tell you something else. Doing that is hard. It's not easy for companies to do that.
Casting a wider net is perfectly reasonable.
Right.
Okay?
But it's hard to do because companies just aren't built that way. And so when they set goals, when American Airlines, United, Starbucks, all the companies you mentioned set goals, that's what they're referring to. They're saying we're going to cast a wider net by going to places we haven't been before that have a greater population of demographics that we really don't have here. That doesn't mean we're going to hire them if they're not qualified.
First of all, these companies have not made that clear at all. And just to be
different issue. But if you listen to the quarterly conference calls, they're a lot clearer on these.
There's some confusion about terms here, and you already know this, and this does not need to be repeated. But just in case people aren't aware, companies like Starbucks, they had their quota pledge to achieve 30% BIPOC representation and 40% in retail roles by 2025. Pfizer wanted to reach 32% minority representation at VP level and above by 2025. They walked this back eventually. Meta also had these.
Problem with that? Why did you have a problem?
Nike wanted a quota pledge to ensure 30% of their U.S. workforce was Black or Latinx by 2025.
Rob,
so that's different from what you are saying.
Why do you have a problem with that? If that's a goal, not a quota, that's a goal.
That's a goal. Because and this goes to the deeper problem. I still, what you're talking about, first of all, about expanding the net of people to select for your company, that's a noble goal. And if you're not already doing that's a big issue.
That's what I've always argued. That's always been my definition of DEI. Always.
But that's not what DEI people are saying.
No,
okay? And you'll disagree with them. So then this is where we need different terms. Maybe you need to stop using the word DEI, because when people say DEI, they're referring to racial and gender and sexual orientation specific goals, and in some cases quotas.
Okay, if it's a quota, they can just say quota, even though they know it's illegal, right? But if it's goals, right, you would see progressions in their EEOC reports, right? If they were able, if what you were saying is true, and they're not hiring specifically based off of merit, but the tie goes to the BIPOC, right? The person of color, or by whatever it may be, right? You would see that in their number. You would see that in general employment, and you just don't.
Okay,
we're not seeing these reports, and we didn't in the past, where all of a sudden these companies, the unemployment rate for people of color drops because everybody's hiring for the reasons you've said, right? You're just not seeing it. If that were the case and they were getting an advantage because they're only 13% of the population, you probably should see an unemployment rate less within white collar jobs than you saw for white Americans, right? If it was so prevalent. Don't you agree? Because there would be a numerical impact on the final numbers.
So we're getting into another adjacent issue, which is about the outcomes.
You want to have a conversation?
Yeah.
You agree that you would see an impact on the numbers if people of color were advantaged. You would see that, because when it's the law of small numbers, when they're only 13% of the population, and you have all these huge companies that you say are giving them advantages, you would see the unemployment rate for white collar jobs and jobs that are relevant there decline. And it should be less than white Americans. Shouldn't it be? Isn't that math?
Yeah. Okay. So, we can talk about this particular issue, and then we can circle back to when you say DEI, that's not what DEI advocates are talking about. So maybe you need to adopt better terminology for what you're talking about.
What business people do. I tell you what
business people do. That's not DEI.
You're talking about businesses and what they're doing. And then you said they set goals because they can't set quotas. You think maybe they were quotas. So you said this is what these companies, and you named the company. So we're in the business realm, not the university realm. We're in the business realm. And if they do the things that you said that they do, not what I said that they should do, but they're actually hiring people who aren't, and they're making hirings not based off of merit, right? Then we should see a reflection of that in the numbers, so that white collar jobs for people of color should decline at a greater rate than, or should even be lower, because it's the law of small numbers, than white Americans, right?
Well, if the companies actually ended up doing what they said they would, you would have more minority representation.
Okay, so what you're saying now is they didn't do it.
Well, okay, so we can get to that. But so some companies walked it back. Some companies did do it. Other companies didn't do it. So a lot
of companies did it that you saw the data that confirmed that they did it?
Pardon?
Which companies? You just said some of them did it. Which companies do you believe did it? And you have data that reflects the fact that they did it.
So I read this last night, and I'm pretty sure you tweeted about this at some point too, by the way. And we can pull it up. But an article in Bloomberg, if that's any authority.
Oh no, the one that says 94% of the incremental hires, right? That one.
Yeah, went to people of color. The year after BLM protests, the S&P 100 added more than 300,000. Hold on. They added more than 300,000 jobs. 94% went to people of color. Is that not a reflection of?
No, because they used the data incorrectly. So go back and look at the responses to that, Bloomberg. and I think they may even retracted it. Go back and look at the responses to that. Not
Okay.
It's been multiple years ago. That was what, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever.
The article's 2 years ago.
Okay, 2 years, whatever it is. It was several years ago. And so because what it said was the incremental hiring in those companies, when you look at the total numbers, and again, I'm trying to do this from memory, it didn't include retirees, it didn't include people who were fired, it didn't include rollbacks in employment. So there were a lot of people who questioned that that article, and there certainly wasn't anything out there to confirm it. Now, right?
Okay.
So there should be other numbers. My point is, there are numbers that are published by all these companies that you mentioned.
Okay.
A lot of that is the EEOC data, and I don't know if all of them are still publishing because all the PR risk. Like you could even look at Tesla. Tesla was a majority minority company in 21 and 22. I think was the last time that, and even then, when you looked at the numbers, it wasn't staggering over hiring of minorities or Asians or whatever it may be, right? They just have the nature of their workforce is they were majority minority, and that's just the way it is. Other companies are going to be the opposite, but when you look at the numbers, they don't confirm what you're saying.
Okay, so again, this is not the heart of our disagreement here. We're going into a very specific thing here, but according to this Bloomberg article, the share of minority groups at
94%.
Yeah,
I think
but they said it increased by two percentage points. The share of executive, managerial, and professional roles held by people of color increased by about 2 percentage points compared with 2020, and that sounds like a small number, but that's more than double the average annual gains at big and mid-sized companies in previous years. But you're saying that data is flawed.
Yeah. So no. Okay. The overall report was flawed, but let's just take it for what that is accurate. The increase in 2%. Do you think you could find 2% more employees if you cast a wider net? There you go.
Okay, so this gets at the heart of the debate here, which is you're saying expanding the talent pool, considering other people, but why specifically then with DEI and with all these companies in 2020 and 2021, they made pledges specifically to increase the amount of minority representation, in some cases specifically their black representation, right? We want to double our black workforce.
Yeah, they
want to increase it to 13%, 20%.
They virtue signal.
Okay, so are you disagreeing that those goals are wrong?
No, it's up to them. I don't care. They get to choose what they get to choose.
No, your opinion. Your opinion.
Well, my opinion is it's up to them. I don't care one way or the other.
Okay, I'm asking you, if you're managing these companies, would you have these pledges? I want 13% of my workforce. I don't
make pledges like that. I just go out and do. I don't need to virtue signal. Like I went to BLM marches because I thought it was the right thing to do. I talked to our predominantly black employee workforce and I listened to their stories and telling me things that I had no idea about that were completely foreign to me that they had to go through. And I was like, okay, I feel like supporting you. I didn't make anybody else do it. I didn't make any, proclamations about we're going to hire more of this. I do think that, I do think there's a lot for companies to learn in terms of their employees who are people of color, but it's up to them. If you want a virtue signal and say, we want 30% more of this, or United, we want in our training school, which by the way, people have to pay for, 50% more people of color, good for you, you go girl, go. But to do that is the question. To how you do it is really what I think you should care about, but it's your choice. The question is, how do you do it? Me, if I felt like I had, not done a good job hiring, which I'm not always great at hiring, I cast a wider net because you're going to get more qualified employees.
Okay, so this gets at the heart of the debate. Aside from the outcomes and the practicalities of what's happened at companies and what hasn't, the heart of this debate here, which is I'm very confused why you support this still, and perhaps you can clarify and potentially amend your position. Why are we only talking about race, right? When you talk about expanding the diversity, expanding the pool of talent, okay, that's what you're saying. But DEI, and you also seem to be on board with this. You're saying, well, you don't care what the DEI advocates say, but you seem to agree strongly with the DEI purists and ideologues that expanding the talent pool means specifically looking at racial groups, which in my opinion, that is not.
No, you still got to hire the most talented person. It's not, so you can expand racial groups, you can expand whatever, right? When you expand your net, you're always looking for the most talented people. Because I think what you're confused is, gender is 50%, right? Give or take. White people are 70+% of the workforce. They're there. So what you're suggesting is, let's go find more white people. They're not hard to find everywhere, right? Now, if there was a situation where, hey, we got this company, we just don't have enough white people, and I think that's hurting us, then it would be like, okay, let's go to an all-white university and find more qualified applicants and see if they're qualified to get jobs. Great. If that's the circumstances, I don't care. Companies will make their own decisions on how they do that and what they need.
Okay, but why are you focusing, when you say, again, expanding the talent pool, why are you focusing on racial diversity and not other kinds of diversity?
They're the minorities. Okay. They are in the minority. They're not, it's like pick whatever demographic. They are in the minority. The people in the majority are everywhere. I'm white, right? I'm a dude. So I'm in one representation, I'm 70 whatever percent of the workforce. In another representation, I'm 50%. You don't have to look hard to find people who look like me, right? And so that's the underpinning of the logic.
So you're saying, are you implicitly admitting that, and for yourself or for other companies, that by having these racial pledges, they're saying, or maybe you're saying, that you haven't done a good job in trying to find talent from diverse backgrounds? Depends
on the company.
How about for yourself?
So if I'm a CEO of a company and I say, you know what? I look around, I only see people who look like me, and I want more diversity of opinion and thought. Okay, that's fair, because you may sell to a demographic.
That's not what DEI is, but okay.
Yeah, but I'm saying that's the basis.
I agree with that. Everyone agrees with that, but that's not what DEI is.
Why are you getting such agita about all of this? Because the reality is, that's how CEOs make decisions.
Diversity of race is not diversity of opinion. And if you think that, that's actually a very racist opinion to have.
No, okay, so diversity of race doesn't for sure say you're getting diversity of opinion, right? But you may be getting diversity of experience based on what you're looking for, right? Now, if it doesn't potentially, right? But that's part of running a company. Everything's potentially. Okay. Everything potentially can impact your outcomes and your net numbers potentially. And as CEO, your job is to evaluate all the potentialities and make a determination what's best for your company. Now, potentially, you might think you need to virtue signal. You might say, hey, wear MAGA hats all you want. Our company we buy MAGA hats and we put them everywhere on every desk in our company. Okay, if that's what you want to do, great. More power to you. I don't care. MAGA is not a protected. I don't care. Companies make their own decisions. That's part of being a CEO. That's part of being an entrepreneur. That's part of the process.
What you just said there about looking around your office and you want more diversity of opinion or diversity of experience, even, race is not a good proxy for opinion or experience.
Well, it depends on what it is you're looking for. But you still, no matter whatever that opinion is I'm looking for, I'm not going to limit it to a specific race, right?
That's what these companies said.
What's that?
These companies, Starbucks, Microsoft, United Airlines, they didn't say we want people of different persuasions on politics, and spirituality, and science, and they didn't say that. They said we want to double our black workforce. We want more people of a certain skin color. That's what they said. Not what you're saying.
It's up to them to say what they want. This is a free country. They can do it the right way. They can do it the wrong way. It's not me to judge. I can pass my opinion. I don't care what they say. I care what they do. I care that they don't hire illegally, that they don't preference white people or black people or Hispanic or Asian, that they hire the most talented person. But what you're missing in all this, that's not the hard part. I mean, let me rephrase that. What you're missing in all this is that for 99% of positions, finding the most qualified person is very nebulous. It's very subjective. And so that's the hard part in all of this. All the rest is mishigas, right? The hard part is how do you make a determination that one secretary is more qualified than another, that one college graduate that wants to come into a sales training or be an apprentice, for whatever is more qualified than another. That's hard. That's really, really hard. That gets you down to a coin flip in a lot of cases. And that's the hard part for companies, right? Where you have an argument is, do companies, when it's a coin flip in terms of qualifications, do they do what Elon Musk said and said, if it's a toss-up, I'll give it to the person of color, right? That's hard. And companies that, that's probably the hardest decision in dealing with all of this. And you just have to dig. We just tried to dig deeper to try to find a point of differentiation for each employee or each candidate before we made them an employee.
So are you denying that over the past few years, and I mean, we can talk anecdotally, you're talking about some kind of data here, which we can get into, but are you denying that in the last few years, especially in the wake of George Floyd and the rise of Black Lives Matter, that if you are a Black individual or other person of color or other marginalized community member and you're qualified for a particular position, that you are not positively advantaged, right? Because what many CEOs and companies, what many CEOs and listen, hey, hold on. What many CEOs and companies have said is that we want Black talent, we want people of minority, quote unquote, underprivileged backgrounds at our companies. Are you doubting that positive advantage has existed for minority people?
You're conflicting yourself. You're saying it's okay to pass a wider net. And so when you recruit more people from more diverse communities, you are going to get more people from different demographics. And that will open the door for finding more qualified people within those demographics. That's what I hear when I hear what you've said.
Okay, I support that. I think everyone supports what you just said.
That's what you said. You might not like the way you said it. You might think it's wrong, but that's effectively what you said. We want more minorities here. How do you get those minorities? What steps do you take? You cast a wider net, and then you look for qualified people, and hopefully, you're going to get more people who are Black or whatever demographic you're looking for, or whatever demographic they happen to be is a better way to say it. And so by casting a wider net, when you say those things, that's how you get to that. You get to that destination. It's really straightforward.
Okay, or you might not, or you might get other kinds of diversity, like diversity of opinion or economic background, school background, family background, religious background.
Whatever.
But, so this is my critique of DEI, and I don't understand why you don't get this.
No, you
DEI,
still hire the most qualified person. You still always hire the most qualified person. Now,
but that's not what DEI is about.
Yes, it is. It always
DEI centers on race and gender as a factor.
No. Now, if you want to get into the academic side where all the academicians talk about this, and I don't even know all the people's names, and they build all these businesses around it and doing training, great.
Ibram X, Kendi and Robin DiAngelo.
Training that companies use that may or may not, you may or may not agree with, great. But those are different issues. What happens in academia, I've always disagreed with. The fact that the University of Michigan spent $20 million on a DEI department, I think that's insane. I think having these huge departments specifically dedicated to DEI in universities is not the best use of their funds, in my opinion. Right?
All right. I'm aware you think this. Yeah.
It's up to them, right? What activists say, I don't give a fuck, right? Because I'm a business guy trying to do what I think is right in supporting my portfolio companies and supporting the companies I run, right? We can only hire the most qualified people, period, end of story.
Okay, again, DEI, there's still a lot of distance here in between what you're saying and what I'm saying. Okay, DEI, tell me if you agree or disagree with this. DEI, and this is part of the problem, is when you say DEI, it's very different from what other people mean by DEI, including the people who are the major advocates of this, who are best-selling books on diversity.
Tell me the people who are running the companies, the people who are entrepreneurs starting the companies, because they're the decision makers. All the people who write books, people write books and send me books on business all the time. You say all this shit, right? I don't care.
Okay,
right?
All right, fine. Okay, and the only thing I'll say on that is then I think you need different terminology than DEI. When you say I support DEI,
different terminology, Rob.
because you're using their terminology.
Your terminology because somebody wrote it in a book. That's what you're telling me, right? This person who's an activist wrote it in a book, and that's the definition that they used, and that's the definition they want to convey. I've heard the same thing from other people, but the people in the businesses, what you're telling me is they set goals. Now, you're not telling me that you have data that said, other than one article that says, and even in that article, it was only a 2% increase, but you're not giving me any other data.
94% incremental increase, but
yeah,
okay.
But the 2% within boards or whatever you said it was, right?
Yeah, executive positions. Yeah, and managerial positions.
So, and
okay.
like I said, that article's been debunked.
Okay, all right. But okay, so you're saying that companies who made racial pledges to increase their minority workforce, that's not wrong, and that you would support that.
They get to say whatever they want. They get to virtue signal just like everybody else does. Everybody, right or left, virtue signals. And how they want to virtue signal is up to them. What I care about is operationally what they do. And if I'm a shareholder, I care about what the results are. That's it.
The problem with what you're saying is that operationally, if expanding your talent pool and casting a wider net, if you're not doing that already, is different from saying we want to double our black workforce. We want 40% minority rep. That is different. That's not what you're saying.
No,
that is different.
I'm saying it's the exact same.
You're saying it's the exact same, really?
Because the question I keep on asking you, how do
this is the core of the disagreement. Okay, go on.
Yeah. So how do they get there? How do they get there?
Okay, but why have that goal?
So because they're virtue signaling, but how do they get there?
Well, okay, if they're not already casting a wide enough talent, first of all, it's a bad company if they're not doing that.
No, it's hard. It's not so easy to do that. It's not easy unless, even if you're the size of Starbucks, who has locations everywhere, right? It's not so easy to cast that wide net because going through the process of hiring is time consuming and expensive. And it's difficult.
But then why have the goal of we want to double our black workforce? Just have the goal of we want to expand our talent pool and look at people from different backgrounds. Why focus in on race?
Yeah, Rob, I'll spell it out for you. VIRTUE space SIGNALING.
Okay, you're contradicting yourself. You're saying you agree with them, then you're saying they're virtue signaling.
You asked me why do they say it? Why not say give an alternative sentence? I'm saying because they're virtue signaling. I'm not conflicting. I keep on saying it over and over and over again.
So you disagree with having a racial goal?
No,
you don't. Yeah,
you can get all the goals you want. You can do whatever you want. If you think it's in the best interest of your company to send a message to your potential, your pool, your total addressable market, your TAM. If you think it's in your best interest to send a message to your total addressable market that you are very supportive of BLM and you're going to set a goal, not a quota, a goal of hiring 30% more within these demographics, have at it. I don't care. Now, you take the risk that people like you are going to get upset and might not do business with you, but that is your choice. Now, what you do is what the EEOC cares about. And you've seen Stephen, what's his name, Miller's organization, First Legal Fund or whatever they call it, go out and sue a couple people, but we haven't seen the outcome of that. You haven't seen the EEOC, other than asking people to remove stuff, you're not seeing people come out and say, okay, here's 425, here's the Fortune 500, and 475 of them use quotas. You haven't seen any of that. The proof is not in the pudding in this at all. So it's just virtue signaling. Just like my product, just like when you see a little thing that says new and improved, the best ever, when it ain't, right? Same story.
Your point about these racial quotas not actually happening is just another argument against DEI just being just bad policy on multiple levels. But putting aside about what's happened, okay, you keep on saying, well, it's companies can do whatever they want, and I agree with you, they can do whatever they want. But we're talking about our opinion. So in your opinion, let's say you have 10 companies and all 10 companies in the wake of Black Lives Matter, they say we want to double our black workforce. We want 30% BIPOC, whatever that means, representation in our companies. Do you support that as you articulated?
I mean,
right?
first of all, you haven't
Is that
heard
a good
me
goal
say
to
that
have?
about any of my companies, ever.
Pardon?
You haven't.
never-
I've owned a lot of companies, run a lot of companies. You've never heard me say that.
Okay, well,
Right?
I
What
respect
you've
that.
heard me say publicly,
Uh-huh.
I've said it many times, is diversity, equity, inclusion, just like how I defined it for you. We are going to expand our net. We're going to cast a wider net because I think if we do, the numbers say that we will end up with more people of color who happen to be we will end up with more qualified candidates and hires that were the most qualified candidate that happened to fit whatever demographic, right? Because you're going to find, it's like the NBA. The NBA didn't always. Who was the first? First, there weren't black players, and then they expanded the net, and there were black players.
Yeah, now it's 70% black.
Well, yeah, it's less. I don't know the numbers now, but and
Yeah,
then we went globally, and people we saw in the Olympics. Then all of a sudden, it was China. The Mavs had their first Chinese NBA player, Wang Zhizhi. And I remember vividly saying, okay, the guy's 7'2", and Dodger can shoot like a motherfucker. I saw him when he came and played in the right when I first bought the Mavs. That we had a little exhibition thing at the West End in Dallas, and I got to see him play. I got to play exhibition stuff with him, and so he could play. So we signed him, and he made a debut. Was it 2001 against the Atlanta Hawks, and it was right after China, the country, confiscated an American plane or something, and he got a standing ovation when he went into the game. We expanded the net, and now there are, out of 450 regular roster players, I don't even know how many, but by the way, go down the list: Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, Canadian; Nikola Jokic, Serbian, right? Giannis Antetokounmpo, Greek. You go down the list, and they're all from somewhere else because we spread a wider net. It's the same concept.
Yeah.
If we had not spread a wider net, we could say, boy, we need to just hire more Europeans, but we're not going to put people on the court that can't play, hopefully.
Okay, so I acknowledge, and you've said this clearly, that you did not make any of these racial diversity pledges. Other companies did. And to reiterate for people, because there's so many levels to this, you have said that you support expanding the talent pool, casting a wider net, which I agree with if a company's not doing that already. But you still are supporting companies like Starbucks saying, we want 30% BIPOC representation in our corporate positions.
I'm not supporting or not supporting. I'll say it again. I don't care.
But you've been defending it. You've been defending it in this conversation.
What I keep on telling you is that I care about operationally how they do it, right? Just because I'm curious. I want to see other practices. I want to see the results. And to determine whether or not the results, that's why I went back and looked at the EEOC numbers in the past. I haven't recently, but in the past I have. Because I wanted to see how the proclamations compared to the reality. And the reality never matched the proclamations. So I don't care what they say because it doesn't translate into reality.
Okay, well, so then are we agreeing more than we think we are? Because so are you saying that having race-based goals for, we want to double our black workforce, we want 30% BIPOC representation, are you saying you disagree with having those goals?
No, I say I don't care. It's virtue signaling. I keep on telling you that. I keep on repeating it over and over again.
But you're also not acknowledging the fallacy and lunacy of having race-based goals, because you don't need to have that. If what you want is people of different backgrounds and you want to give more equal opportunity, you don't need to say we want to double our black workforce. All you need to say is we're going to cast a wider talent. We want everyone to apply. We want people of different backgrounds to apply. And by the way, that should be happening already. And companies that aren't doing that, like, they should be held accountable for that if that's happening. But you don't need a race-based goal. And what I don't understand from what you're saying is why have the race-based goal at all? Why are we focused on race? Why not have a political-based goal, like based on experiences or based on, like, if you want people who've been through hard times, right? If you want people that show more resilience, that are more open or more creative, you can target those things. but you don't seem to be. Yeah. And so
Rob, let me ask you a question.
I think you would agree on
Rob,
that, but
Rob,
I don't understand why you don't see the lunacy of zooming in on race as being the target for increasing your diversity, as opposed to religion or your political orientation or your ideas and who you are as a human being. Why can't we focus on the totality of the human being and just say we want people from all backgrounds rather than we strictly want double the black workforce or 30% minority people?
Did you just say it was okay to do it based off of religion?
I'm saying broadly speaking, the totality of factors.
So let me ask you a question. Define virtue signaling.
We agree there. We don't have to talk about that.
Okay. What I keep on saying, and you just don't want to accept it for whatever reason, that the reason these companies are using the word goals and in reference to different demographics is because they are virtue signaling. They made the determination that by saying these things, they convey a certain virtue that they think will be better for their companies. That to me is corporate virtue signaling. That is what they do, what they want to do. If that is their choice. They also realize that there are risks associated with that, and whether they've seen the backlash for people who don't want to do business with somebody who supports Nike supporting Colin Kaepernick. When they came out, and they started working with Colin Kaepernick and they talked about it, that was their choice. And they had a lot of people that, I got, the Clay Travises of the world, talking about NBA ratings. We'll never watch the NBA because, they took a knee and da-da-da-da-da-da-da, right? People make their own determinations. We all virtue signal in our own way.
Yeah.
And so,
okay, fine. Let's put aside that problem then. Let's put aside virtue
that's
signaling.
That's the whole response to you asking me about these companies and their 30% goals.
Okay, fine. Let's put aside what the companies say in public and the virtue signaling and catering to progressive audiences and groups, etc. Do you think it makes sense? Let's say the company's not virtue signaling. Internally, the company has a goal. We want to double our black workforce or have more minority representation. Do you think that makes sense? And I think the answer is yes. You do think that makes sense.
It depends on the circumstances. Again, I think that's primarily virtue signaling because you don't see it in the numbers, in the EEOC numbers. So I don't think they turn around and look inside their company and say, make sure this happens. Maybe some do, but I also think that you also have to look at historical disproportions. Let me ask you a question. Do you think in the past there have been white people in HR who discriminated against black people?
Yes.
Do you think that still occurs today?
In theory, yes.
Okay. Yeah. You don't think in practice?
It's totally possible that happens.
Fair enough.
Just like the other way around.
Right? What's missing is data.
Yeah.
Right. We don't have data one way or the other. And that's fair. And that's a fair response. Right. But if a company has found itself with somebody who ran HR who discriminated against minorities and felt like we made a mistake. Mm-hmm. And we're still only going to hire the most qualified people, but we are going to go out of our way to recruit and do our best to hire more people of color because we historically discriminated. Is that good or bad?
The devil's in the details. As a sentiment, I agree with that. That's a noble sentiment. But as practice, if you're hiring just trying to find the best people based on merit, you're automatically going to have people of color and disadvantaged backgrounds who you end up capturing as a result of that. You don't need to have a racial goal.
So you agree with me now?
You don't need a percentage though. You don't need 30% minority.
Okay, so that's the virtue signaling. But you agree with me that this is what companies should be doing. That this is what the best companies do. Exactly what I've suggested, and that is put aside the activists, but because of what the numbers show, DEI in practice for corporations is just what I've said. Expand the pool and find the qualified people. And there are going to be certain circumstances where companies realize that they did discriminate against people of color. And, maybe the government came after them and said, okay, we're going to take action against you, but maybe not. And maybe they need to, work harder to expand that pool of applicants. And in that particular case, it may be the right thing to say. You don't want to say we historically discriminated, but if you recognize that you did, maybe it's the right thing to say to everybody, hey, we're going to increase our goal is to increase the number the minority workforce by 30%. You don't
Okay,
know.
well, okay. Well, this gets to another point, which is why, again, with that specific goal, you're not always going to have proportional talent in every different area. Okay, the NBA, last I checked, is 70% black. You don't have equal representation of Asians and whites
I never
and
said
people
you
of
need that. You've only heard me say you hired the most qualified people, period, end of story. You keep on saying there's external activists and people who write books that say it's something
and
different.
companies that say it, and you're saying they're virtue signaling. Okay, fine, all right. That's another argument against DEI, is that you're virtue signaling and not actually doing the thing that you said you would.
Welcome to America.
Either way, that's a bad
People on the
outcome.
right virtue signal as well. There are companies dedicated to, only patriotist, right leaning products, right? That only sell MAGA hats, that, it goes both ways. It's not unique to any one position or party or ideology.
Right. So we're agreeing that this is virtue signaling when companies do this. We're agreeing that you should expand that if you're not already casting a wide net, that you should cast a wide net. You should be as inclusive as possible. We're agreeing on that. Where I think what you're still not understanding is that, okay, let me phrase it this way. Do you think it's inherently a problem if at your bank, your accounting firm, your law firm, you have 5% of your workforce is black instead of 13 or 14%? Do you think that's inherently a problem?
No.
Okay. You don't think that that's necessarily the result of racism? Do you think that companies should be making efforts to double their black force?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay. Well, then you're conceding all these points of what DEI is. DEI is we want equal representation. Companies say they want equal representation.
Reasons. You might be in a town that only has 3% black people. It's hard to hire a higher percentage of black people. You might be in a town where the educational level is X and you need Y. There's a million reasons why those things will play out the way they do that have nothing to do with DEI. And trying to make it a DEI issue is ridiculous.
Okay, and this is an adjacent issue, but you brought this up, and I've just looked it up. There are several companies that did increase their minority workforce. Nike, JPMorgan, and Chase, they hired over 3,800 black students since 2020. Nike, as of 2024, is 41% of U.S. corporate workforce is racial/ethnic minorities. They're on track for its goal of 30% of black and Latinx representation by 2025. I disagree with having that goal.
So wait, so JP Morgan, the best bank in America, the largest best bank in America, right? Maybe they just cast a wider net, right?
Yeah. So if that's what they're doing, then great.
Their stock has struggled, right? But they're still the biggest and best shoe company. We'll put aside best. In economic terms, they're still the biggest. So maybe they're doing it right.
That's possible. If that's what's happening, or if what you're doing is we want more black people, let's get more black people, which means.
So let me ask you a question. At some point, because this has been going on for 5 years now, right? We're starting in 2020 is when you said it started, right? And maybe longer, depending on who you listen to, right? So for 5 years, they've been doing this. At what point do you think not hiring the best person impacts their financial statements?
Yeah, I agree. That would make an impact.
Name the situations where you've seen that happen.
I haven't done a rigorous study of every Fortune 500 company, unfortunately.
Just the ones you list, just the ones you talk about. They're pretty straightforward, right? That's my whole point.
I don't think it's going to make a ginormous difference to hire slightly less qualified, and this is a concern about DEI, slightly less qualified minority individuals over their white counterparts because of optics. I don't think that's going to result in,
of course, it's going to
a one-to-one lower net profit per year.
If that's actually the case, right? Because someone says they weren't hired for DEI reasons or promoted for DEI reasons doesn't make it true. But let's go forward. Here we are in 2025. And now there's a huge microscope on all DEI, anything. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't necessarily have a problem with what Trump did. And I don't like what he did in the military where everything was a search and replace. I think that's kind of ridiculous. But in terms of, one of the promises he made was to get rid of DEI. I think, the way I've defined it, it's a cultural situation within organizations. So it doesn't have to be a formal program, and you don't have to have, a big department, if any department at all. It's just adhering to, hiring the best people, putting your people in positions to succeed, and treating your people well and respecting them. And if culturally that's happening within an organization, nothing will really change regardless of what happens from the administration. But if you're right and all these people were wrong in how they do it, all the numbers will decline, won't they, for people of color? And because none of those programs that were in place, so we should see a bunch more promotions of white people, right? Because all those inhibitors are gone. We should see a lot more hiring of white people, right? Because all those inhibitors are gone. We should see higher unemployment relative to where the indexing is. We should see unemployment for people of color index higher. Now, who knows, because of the deportation where that impacts it, but we should see these numbers play themselves out. So we will know over the next couple of years if you were right or wrong.
Okay.
Right?
A couple of examples.
Wait, I want to get a commitment from you, Rob, because our conversations last years. Maybe it'll turn into decades, right? So do you agree that because of the changes introduced by the Trump administration, that they should play out in the numbers, and that we should see more promotions of white people than we did before, and we should see less employment or unemployment over-indexing relative to white people, because all those advantages that were supposedly in place by DEI are now being removed, and you can't virtue signal them anymore because that works against you. You can virtue signal the other way, but so we should see this net impact on the numbers. Do you agree with that?
This is too complicated of a multifactorial equation. If companies are directly responding to what the administration is doing, then sure.
They have no choice. You've got Caroline Lucas, the one who called me out on Twitter, right? And said she's in charge of the EEOC. There's nothing that's going to make her happier. I guess she's interim, but there's nothing that's going to make her happier than to find somebody who's using quotas or doing it the wrong way when it comes to trying to reach their goals. That would give everybody in the anti-DEI world the best heart on they've ever had, right? And so these things should play out in the numbers. Don't you agree?
Right. Yeah. They could, except if companies find a way around it. If they're just having these nebulous goals.
Then you're saying that there was no point in even trying to do anything about DEI because companies will just work around it?
I don't know. I'm not a CEO, so I don't know what companies are going to do. But I'm saying it's possible they could have a workaround. It's possible.
What's the guy's name? Robbie Starbucks or whatever?
Pardon?
Robbie Starbucks, is that the guy's name?
What guy's name?
Isn't there a guy, Robbie Starbucks, that is like, anti-DEI at every level?
I think I've heard that name on Twitter somewhere. I don't know. I don't know that guy.
Yeah, maybe I'm mispronouncing his name. But the point being that there are, Christopher Rufo, right? There are people who their whole mission in life is to catch people doing these things and to make an issue of them and reverse them, which is fine. They're welcome to do that. I don't care, right? That's what makes a market. That's checks and balances. That's what makes this country great, is that they can do it.
Okay.
But if they're correct, we should see an impact on employment numbers. You have to agree with that, because otherwise there's no point in having this hour-long conversation.
It's possible unless companies find a workaround, which I don't know. I'm not a business executive, so I don't know how companies run things.
I've been telling you how it works for business executives.
You know that better than I do. But just to make this very clear for people, what you said earlier is worth highlighting. There's a big distance between the BLM DEI advocates like Ibram X Kendi, who says things like,
I don't know who that is. Oh no, I've heard his name. I don't really know.
He's maybe him and Robin DiAngelo, two of the most popular anti-racist, BLM supporting, DEI supporting authors of this age. Ibram X Kendi has said, and he's gotten millions of dollars of donations in the wake of BLM and George Floyd. He has said, every time I see a racial equality, I assume there's an inequity. I assume there's injustice or unfairness. And you disagreed with that, and I agree with you on that. Disparities do not always equate to discrimination.
I don't know what he says. I don't know anybody who knows who he is, right? Or gives a chord to what he says. So maybe they know. We don't discuss it. Let's put it that way.
Those are very popular names. Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X Kendi are incredibly popular names in the DEI.
Ibram, whatever his name is, the other
Ibram
guy.
X, Kendi.
I've never heard of him. So it doesn't influence me one way or the other.
Yeah, so that's
I
part of
don't
the
think they
problem.
have any influence, but
Yeah.
the bigger point is, just like on the right, you have people that are hardcore MAGA, and no matter what Donald Trump says, it is right. And you have people on the left who are pro-DEI, and everything that is geared towards making white people seem, vindictive towards black people, they are going to say. That's how marketing works. That's how businesses are built. That's what happens. And fortunately for people on the right, more people spend money on subscriptions to podcasts and subscriptions elsewhere than they do on the left. But just because a guy makes a business out of it doesn't mean he's influential.
Part of the problem here is that when you say DEI, it's very different from what the DEI advocates say. So we're agreeing that not all racial disparities equal discrimination, but the DEI advocates and the people who've originated these theories, critical race theory, intersectionality, DEI, anti-racism, Black Lives Matter, like all these things, the greatest, most influential people in those fields, in academia, in popular discourse, and on social media, they have a very different view than you do.
Great. So what? What I talk to you from, so you're using as your variables of importance, you're referencing corporations, everything in hiring. I guarantee you that the CEOs and the entrepreneurs who start and run these companies aren't, I shouldn't say never, rarely are giving any consideration to what those people think they are due.
Except for the optics of not having enough black people at your law firm, not having enough women representation at Google, et cetera, et cetera.
That's a corporate decision. And like we said and agreed on, it's virtue signaling.
For example, in 2017, James Damore, he circulated the Google memo, giving some potential evolutionary, psychological, and biological reasons for why there might be a disparity in gender at Google, why there might not be enough female engineers, differences in occupation choice by women, right? Women tend to select computer science and engineering less in college than men do. He was fired for doing that Google memo,
okay.
Right? So that's just one example of someone who's articulating these heterodox opinions, who is pointing out that not all racial or gender disparities in this case are attributable to discrimination, and that's the consequence that you face. And that's another issue.
Why was he fired? Was he fired because of what he said, or did he violate a company policy?
It was very obvious that it was because of what he said.
Okay.
If he had not said that, but
I'll just tell you from my experiences, what may appear as obvious on the outside rarely is.
I'm proposing to you to not use the term DEI, because DEI is not your term.
I'm going to use it all day. Every
DEI
day.
was not invented in the business realm, though. DEI was invented by far left, identitarian, sometimes socialist, Marxist activists. That's their term.
I don't care.
By the way, they would probably call you racist for co-opting their term.
And not I co-opted industries. I'm changing healthcare with costplusdrugs.com. I started the streaming industry. I did the first all high-def TV network. Every time someone said, "Oh, don't do that," fuck that, right? I'm just telling you, I'll co-op shit. I don't care. I'm telling you, and we're having a great conversation on this. Just because someone else used it, who started the Democratic Party, who switched, the Southern, there's all this nomenclature that evolves over time. The term woke is evolved. Just everything evolves over time. So don't use it because this person started. I don't care.
You need better terms, or
properly better terms,
or properly redefine.
Okay. You can either decide to, look at it from my perspective, and I think you have, and I appreciate that, and disagree that I use this term. But there's nothing you can say that can tell me to change it. It's not going to happen.
Okay. Well, as you know, people mean different things by DEI, and the DEI advocates, right, the most popular ones, they don't mean what you mean by it. And so that's worth noting on your part. And maybe you should do a better job when you're saying I support DEI. You should be like, hey, I'm not supporting closing racial disparities just for the sake of closing them, which is what the advocates are saying.
Rob, I've been very clear what I mean by it. I say it early. I say it often. I say it late. I say it during the day. I'm very consistent in what I've said. I say it online. I say it in speeches I give. I sit in groups that where, people who are very supportive, probably of the people that you've mentioned, and I stick to the same definition. And you are the only person ever who has told me not to use the term. And that's fine. You can, and I respect your willingness to ask, but it's not going to happen.
Okay, fine. The remaining disagreement we have on this, and I'm glad we're filtering through all this noise, the virtue signaling, what companies are actually doing, right? We're establishing DEI, the goals the companies are setting, they're not actually being met in some cases. In other cases, they are being met. And so, and I sense there is...
You got to show me data. Other than one article, you got to show me company-specific data.
Okay. Apple, they increased the number of Black employees in leadership by nearly 60% from 2020 to 2024.
Okay.
Microsoft increased their Black and African American representation among employees by 1.5%. Okay, that's pretty small. Google, they saw a 27% increase in Black plus, whatever that means, leadership representation from 2020 to 2023. So that leaves us with two possibilities on that front. And I think the answer is pretty obvious. Either Google, Microsoft, and these other companies before were for some reason perpetuating racism and not properly casting a wide net and giving Black Americans equal opportunity, or what's more likely is what's happening is that they're deliberately looking for Black talent, even if it might mean that they're a bit less or maybe more substantially less qualified than white talent. I disagree with that.
You're saying by definition, if you hire more Black people, they must be less qualified.
I gave you two scenarios. I said
no,
either.
One of those is that's exactly what you said. You said you gave examples of these numbers going up, and you specifically said that by definition, it means that they must have hired people less qualified.
That's not what I said.
Yes, you did.
I said those are two scenarios. I said, or the scenario is that those companies were racist in their hiring and talent pool before.
That was the first option, right?
That was, yeah. So either
what was the second option? What was your second option?
Or the second option is that you're hiring more Black people just for the sake of having more Black people.
And so that's only an issue. So if you're hiring more Black people, are they more qualified? Let me rephrase that. The Black people you hired, is it possible in your mind that they just cast a wider net and they found more qualified Black people?
That I already said in the first option.
So why are you presuming when you give these numbers, why are you presuming that that's not the case? Because you just said because
the percentage is so ginormous. 60% more Black employees, 30%.
So it's impossible to find, because there's also, maybe they started from a small base. Maybe there were only 100 Black employees in those positions, and they increased it to 161. But you don't seem to think it's feasible that they just are more qualified, and that's why Microsoft hired them?
Sure, but then that means that Microsoft's original policy for hiring people was incredibly racist, or that they were not inclusive to other racial groups, which means, wow, that's a lot of racism if that's true.
Well, maybe they just didn't do a good job and they improved. Is that possible?
Yeah, but 60% increase in Black applicants?
Yeah, but from what number to what number?
Yeah, I don't know. We can find the granular details, but those are big jumps.
You don't think that matters? Look, either you believe that you can find more qualified Black people by casting a wider net, or you don't. And just because a number is 61% doesn't mean that either A, they were inefficient at what they were doing before, even though it's possible, or B, doesn't mean they were less qualified because it's a big percentage. Not at all.
I'm saying it's very likely that you are honing in on race as a sole variable. You want more Black people in the wake of BLM and George Floyd. You don't want activists to get mad at you. You have potentially woke employees who are saying, oh, there's too many white guys here. Let's have more gay people, trans people, Black people. And to address that pushback, you're now selecting for these specific racial and gender groups to have at your company.
So they're selecting for these racial and gender groups to have in their company. What's the rest of it?
I mean, that's it. There's this obsessive focus on race and gender and sexual orientation. And so then that's what they're using.
You realize the underlying presumption there, right? Is that it's not possible that they were qualified, because you think it's a big percentage. So because it's a big percentage, it's not possible that they just happened to interview more and find more qualified candidates, and they hired some of them because they were more qualified.
I'm sure some of them are more qualified,
Oh,
but
some of them are more qualified because it's impossible to find a big number of black people who are more qualified, right?
unless your company was executing a racist policy and you were not
No, or you just
properly
didn't
giving
do a
black
good
people a
job.
fair
It didn't
shake.
necessarily have to be intentional. It didn't have to be intentional. Maybe they just started paying attention to it. Maybe because of all the things that happened with BLM, they started paying attention to their hiring policies and realized they were not doing a good job. Is that possible?
But then
Okay, why wasn't that option number 3? Why wasn't them casting a wider net option number 4, Rob?
Because if you're casting a wider net, why are we specifically focusing on black Americans and transgender Americans,
Rob,
gay Americans,
you're
minority people?
focusing on them. You are focusing on them.
No, the companies are
reporting.
focusing on them.
They're reporting, right? You are focusing on what they reported because the only reason you know these numbers is why.
They reported it.
Right.
And it's in line with their stated goals.
Focusing on that because if you look at the EEOC numbers, what are the demographic categories that they have to report?
Gender, race, ethnicity.
So they reported what they had to report by law. And you're saying, and so you're trying to make it out like because they reported it, they must be living up to this approach of only hiring because of demographic. And what I'm telling you, no, they're just doing what they need to do by law. And you're looking at it, looking for things to support your point that you're trying to make that they must have put race and gender, et cetera, over qualifications. There's no
I think they put
evidence
disproportionate emphasis on immutable characteristics. That's what I'm saying.
Well, that's what you're saying, but you have no evidence whatsoever. You're guessing that.
It's okay. Let's see if we can resolve this disagreement.
Yes or no? Are you guessing that?
Well, it's based on ginormous jumps in these numbers and the fact that these statistics have changed.
The EEOC, Rob, just for your own edification, right? I don't have it here. The EEOC numbers include actual numbers if they're published. Okay. And you can go back and at the bottom of them, it gives a total. And then underneath, usually it says the previous years. So you can see the jump, which is what you've been able to identify.
Yeah, 60%, 30% jumps.
Right. But you could look at the actual numbers and you get to see what the reference points are. Is it a huge number? They had, out of 100,000 employees, now they have many more, 97,000 were black and they increased it 61%. Okay, you look and you can see the actual numbers. Or was it 100,000 employees and 4,000 of them were black and they increased it to 4,240. Hired 240 more.
Yeah, okay. I got that point. Let me say it this way, and then hopefully we can move on to the next topic after this. Let's see if we can resolve this disagreement here. Okay, if I'm the owner of a company and I want to have people of different backgrounds, diverse experiences, and to clarify, I said earlier, I mentioned all kinds of things: personality, life experience, family background, religious background, political opinions. I think that the totality of the person should be potentially considered in a lot of places. Of what has this person endured? What kind of experiences have they had? Has this person been, given a trust fund when they were kids and just had everything handed to them on a platter, or did this person overcome a lot of hardship and worked multiple jobs? Okay, if I'm the CEO of a company, and tell me if you disagree with this, and I'll grant you that companies can do what they want, okay, as long as they're not violating civil rights law. But if I'm the CEO of a company or CEO of 10 companies, I would be selecting based on merit. We want people of diverse experiences, people who come from different backgrounds, but not hone in on race and gender and sexual orientation. We just want the best people. And we want people who've overcome challenges, who've overcome hardships. But the problem of what these other companies, what they've said is, we want to double our black workforce. We want to increase minority representation. And what happens is, by doing that, you are potentially favoring privileged black guy, privileged brown guy who, his parents went to Ivy League universities. He went to Harvard, had all these things handed to them, didn't have to work multiple jobs in college. Okay, you preferentially favor that guy over the poor white guy who grew up in inner city Baltimore, who had a single mom, had to work 2 different jobs in high school. But because he's white, he is actively not the black applicant is preferenced over the white applicant simply because of race. And so what I'm advocating for is looking at merit and the person's skills, life experiences, and not focusing on race. And so that's the problem of DEI. I mean, do you disagree with my approach of not factoring in race at all and just factoring the person's skill sets and what they've been through in life, let's say?
Look, I've done blind applications, so that'll tell you where I stand, right? But when you look, you're never going to have two people that are exactly the same. And so it's never going to be a balance in their resumes. There's always going to be something different. So why do you give preference to somebody who grew up like me versus someone who's growing up like my kids? Because both of us, let's just say we graduated college at the same time. We're in a movie, it's switch, right? And we come back and we're graduating at the same time. How do you make that determination? If you're the person in charge of hiring, how do you determine one candidate versus another?
Okay, we do an interview and let's say, okay, well, what was your high school experience?
And let's just say you love them both. They were different,
okay,
but you love them both.
Okay, if they both have roughly equal education and SAT scores, GPAs, whatever, and the one guy, he had a single mom and he had to work 3 jobs in high school and college, and the other guy, his dad was a hedge fund manager, I might be more interested in the guy who had to work his fucking ass off to get to where he is right now, as opposed to the other guy.
That stops you from doing that. That's, everybody's going to make hiring people who are doing the HR is going to make the determination based off of what they think is best. Now,
but that's not what companies said in 2020. That's not what companies said in 2020. They said we want to double our black workforce. That's different from what I said.
But when they get to the wider net, they have to make decisions on the people they actually interview. If you're hiring for one position where you want that commitment and determination, okay, you make one choice. If you're hiring for a job where it's for a hedge fund and you want the person to raise money, right? It's a tougher call because you might have to balance this person's, connections versus this person's lack of connections, but willingness to work harder. Jobs are hard to hire for. Hiring is hard, Rob.
So why have racial goals?
Really hard. Why have what?
Why have racial and gender goals, and why not? Why?
Because I can't say it enough times, Rob. Companies virtue signal.
Okay. So we're agreeing on that, but you're still not calling out this idea, this principle that these goals that various companies have set for increasing racial representation at their companies. Whereas I would say just increase it, just cast a wider net and see who you get. And you might get 5%. You might cast a really wide net. You might get 5% qualified black applicants.
What you're really telling me is you don't like the way the companies communicated their goals. And
I think their goals are wrong. I don't agree with race-based goals.
Okay, so that's fine. When you run the company, you choose. When you now as an opinion, and as an influencer, you get to say what you want. That's the way this country works, and that's what makes it beautiful.
We're not debating that. Yeah, everyone has the right to say what they want.
You're not coming to any conclusions. You're not changing my mind or anything because there's nothing really substantial on what you're saying. What the foundation of what you're saying is because these external people who I don't know, that are activists that I don't read, who post everywhere and influence people that I don't know, that
we already made that caveat. We're just talking about companies and their racial goals, and you seem to keep on defending their race-based goals.
I don't care. They have their reasons. If I'm concerned about a company not hiring based off of merit, I'll look at the numbers. I'll look at the company. But no matter what, it'll play out in the numbers at some point. And now, Rob, we get to actually see the counter argument. And that's going to make this interesting. Awesome. So we can have this conversation in 2 years or whatever and say, okay, what happened now that we removed DEI as a construct where DEI is not a positive, from the administration and could put you under assault or whatever, you could find yourself on the wrong end of a lawsuit. So we'll find out, because if what you say is true and there are certain demographics that were being advantaged as a way to hit goals, not quotas, but goals, then those will reverse at some point, and we'll see that, right?
Okay. Last question on this. Why are you not willing to condemn companies who have these race-based goals? Why do you say they're virtue signaling, but also I understand what they're doing? I don't
look, if I thought it was that bad, I'd start a company to compete with them.
Okay. But at your companies, you don't do race-based goals or gender-based goals.
No.
Okay, so you are actively going against what DEI ideology stands for, and that's okay.
So
Okay, all right, then
we implement
we're agreeing.
DEI the way I understand it and the way I believe it and what I know to be its definition. Just because you don't like my definition doesn't make me wrong.
Last thing I'll say on this, a quote from your Lex Friedman interview. I already said last thing. Okay, last thing on this.
Let's go, Rob. I'm just here.
On Lex Friedman, you said something to the effect of, if I have 30 white guys at my company and I'm looking around and I want more diverse perspectives, why is it wrong to look towards more black applicants? And my question to you is, why do you conflate diversity of experience, diversity of personality, diversity of human being with race? Because you can have black people and white people with very similar ideologies and beliefs.
Sure.
Race is not a good proxy for
But it's my
judging.
company, and I'm looking at the 30 people, right? And
Okay.
so I know who they are. It's only 30, not 300, not 3,000, not 30,000. It's
Okay.
300. And so I'm able to determine, because I know them, that there's a lack of diversity of opinion.
But diversity of race is not diversity of opinion. Why do you think
Not
those two
necessarily,
things are the
no.
same?
It doesn't have to be just because of race, but there's a good chance that you can open up new ideas and new ideas if you cast a wider net, right? And just interview people that are different. Now, if I can't find a more qualified one, which most likely means I'm not interviewing enough or in the right places, that's on me. And it may be also a reflection in that example. I don't remember what the context was, but it may also be that I didn't do a good enough job of casting a wide net. It may well be that I just went to one school or two schools or five schools, or maybe because it's a small company, I only hired based off of reference. And if I only hired, start with two people in my small company, they said, hey, and I've done this. I'm like, hey, who do you know that can work for the company? Okay, do you trust them? Yeah, we'll train them. Great. Then another one, and the next thing you know, they all look like me because I hired them via my friends. And you look around and you go, we all know each other, right? We need to get some other viewpoints in all this because we go to the same bars, we watch the same teams, we hang out, we went to the same 3 or 4 schools, and you want to expand, the hiring net.
Yeah,
So
but that's nothing to do with race.
exclusive.
That transcends race, though. That transcends.
Yeah, but it just so happens, right? The way life works, the way business works, when you're growing a company, you take the path of least resistance. And some days when you look up and you realize that the path of least resistance wasn't the best path, and that you're missing opportunities because I didn't expand a wide enough net, and maybe I don't even have the most qualified people. Because when you're a small company, you rarely just hire the most qualified person. I didn't always hire the most qualified person, because when it's me and 500 people and I'm just trying to keep the doors open and I'm just trying to make sure I get my payroll paid, I ain't going to 5 universities to make sure there's the diversity. I'm saying to my friends, who do you know?
Right. But this has nothing to do with race, though. We're agreeing. But this is not racial. So,
right, but all I'm saying is, if I look around and I see people who look like me, there's a chance I did it wrong.
Okay, but you could be in your own downtown Manhattan Ivy League bubble, and you could have 2 black guys and 2 gay guys and have 10 white guys and have a couple of trans people or whatever. And that to me is not diversity. That, like, people who went to the same school, people with the same.
Yeah, but why do you assume that it's about diversity and not about qualifications?
I'm saying that racial diversity does not mean, racial or gender diversity does not mean you're going to get true diversity of life experience or opinion.
That's true. But again, at the end of the day, it comes down to hiring the most qualified people. And if the way you hire, like most small businesses, is by referral, you're not necessarily hiring the most qualified people. And you probably haven't cast a wide enough net, which is not unusual because it's expensive, hard, and time consuming for smaller businesses to do that. And so some days you look up and you realize, oh shit, right? It's not just race-based, but I probably didn't hire the right way.
Yeah.
By the way, I rarely do hiring anymore because I'm not good at interviewing, because I always try to sell myself in that person, whether they're white, orange, green, or yellow, right? I'm like, okay, I can make you work. That's not good for hiring.
The big daylight between what you're saying and what other companies have set out as their goals is that you support expanding the net for finding talent, and that may mean you might get more black employees, more black applicants, or you might get more Indians, you might get more gay people, you might get more Hindus, you might get more Chinese, but not necessarily. You might get more white guys, you might get more people of a certain, but
and that's okay because the numbers
that's
say
not what these companies are saying.
there's a better chance you're going to get more white guys just because of the numbers, right? That's just the way it works. But at the same time, if you cast a wide enough net, there's a ton of people of color who are really, really, really qualified to do just about any job. And so you're going to run into them too, and that's a good thing. That's all.
So casting a wider net and then getting whatever you find, whether that's more diverse or maybe that's less diverse. You're saying even if you get a less diverse population.
The goal is to win. The goal as a company is to win, right? To succeed and be profitable and let everybody, including your employees, make a fuck ton of money. That's the goal.
So you're fine if you're casting a wider net in your talent pool. You're going to more schools and you get 20% less racial diversity as a result of that. Yes. You're perfectly fine with that.
Yeah. Now I'm going to take a look at it again and say, okay, where are we hiring? Because obviously we're missing qualified candidates because I think there's a lot of Black, Hispanic, et cetera, qualified candidates. We're going to analyze our approach, but I'm not mad because we didn't find more in that first outreach. I just want the most qualified candidates, period, in the story.
And that's another sort of partial. I mean, we'll see if this is a disagreement. That people on the left, they assume that when you see a racial disparity in, say, computer science, I wrote some articles on this a few years back. It's turned out in computer science and finance as two examples, there was far less Black students, like compared to their proportion in the population. There was far less percentage that were taking computer science and finance as an example. And so if you have 5% of the student body in the finance class at a university that's Black, then you might not be able to get 13 to 14% Black employees.
Yeah, that's just the way it goes. Like I said before, if you live in a town where there aren't a lot of Black people, aren't a lot of Hispanic people, you're not going to have 13% of your work.
So you're fine with that?
Yes. Why would I not be fine with it?
Okay, great. But that's not what Starbucks and Amazon and Meta and Pfizer.
I don't care. They can virtue signal all they want. Why are you trying to get me to pass judgment on them when, I told you what I think, that they're virtue signaling?
Yeah, but they're not only virtue signaling, though. Those goals are based on false premises that you need to fill exact racial.
You're contradicting yourself.
Statistical
the whole point
numbers.
Of virtue signaling is just to make it seem like you're doing those things, or to let people know so that they want to do business with you.
Except for Apple and Microsoft, who actually made progress on their racial goal that they set out.
But you're presuming that those people aren't qualified.
Okay. Apple sets out a goal. We want more Black people. They get more Black people. It's pretty obvious what's going on there.
See, I can make a lot of comments right now, Rob, and I won't. Right? You're presuming that because they increase the number of people of color, those people must not be qualified, and nothing could be further from the truth.
It's because why weren't you hiring those people of color in the first place?
Because it's hard. Go on. What's the most number of people that have ever worked for you, Rob?
Yeah, less than 0.001% of what you have. So that
no.
I'm not going to win that experience.
Number of people that you've ever hired that have ever worked for you?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, probably less than 15 on the podcast. Yeah.
Is it easy to hire those people and pick those right people?
Is it easy? Finding the right people that I want can be challenging.
Yeah. Have you ever had to fire somebody?
Yeah.
It's hard, isn't it? It's really hard to fire somebody. It's painful to fire somebody because it's an admission that you made a mistake. It's an admission that you didn't put them in a position to succeed, or for whatever the reasons are. Right?
But it wasn't because of race. It wasn't because I wasn't hiring.
The point is, hiring is hard. It is hard to do for big companies and for little companies, particularly for little companies. But big companies have just as many challenges because they have so many levels of bureaucracy. Anyways, look, hiring is hard.
Then do a better job of hiring. Stop fixating on race and gender as your goals.
You know what, Rob? If you were better at all that than they are, you'd have 500 employees, right? You've got a business. Why isn't your business bigger?
Well, I'm a podcaster. I'm like a.
All right, so there's podcasters that make tens of millions of dollars.
I'm relatively new to the game here, and I'm an independent writer first and foremost. But okay.
No, that's good. I'm not trying to diminish, right? I'm a fan of every entrepreneur. I respect everything you're doing. I'm not trying to diminish it all. All I'm saying is it's hard. It's hard to run a business.
I agree.
To grow that business is hard. It's harder for someone like you trying to build build a following and grow people that want to come back and listen, that are willing to commit their time to you, to hear what you have to say. That is fucking hard.
Yeah.
It's not impossible. What is it? 99% of podcasters fail within the first 18 months,
Yep.
if not sooner. So you deserve a lot of credit for getting where you are. But as hard as it is for you, it's not any easier for bigger
I agree.
companies.
I agree. But
And so how they choose to make their decisions, you may not agree with them. You may not. And there's not unanimity in how big companies work on this topic. You keep on giving the same examples. There's not, which shows that, if those 4 companies or 5 or 10 companies are in the Fortune 500, there's 490 that you haven't mentioned, right? That may not feel the same way. It's hard. And so when you say, will I say something negative about them? No, it's hard.
All right. Okay. Again, to close this off, I would select based on merit and talent, and the thing we just talked about earlier.
All those companies.
Okay, but companies like Apple, Microsoft, it's Starbucks, etc., that set out these racial goals. If instead they had said, we're going to cast a wider net and we want to make sure everyone is included and everyone is given a fair shake and a fair chance to be part of our company, and then you end up with 60% more black employees. Oh, great. Okay, all right. But not when you say we want to double our black workforce and now, okay, we've got it. That's the wrong premise to operate from. The premise should be equality of opportunity, not equality of racial representation or equality of outcomes, which is that's what that is.
I'll let you have the last word, but what I'm saying is, the numbers will be the numbers. If that's the wrong way to do it, and they're hiring incompetent people or less qualified people, it'll show up in the numbers. And again, now that we're going through an anti-DEI administration, the converse of those numbers should appear as well. We should see all those mistakes that you feel these companies make reversing themselves. And so we'll know over time which is the right approach. Or it may well be that it was just virtue signaling and it didn't really change what they did. And they were always just hiring the most qualified people.
Yeah. No, yeah. All of that is totally possible. But I think companies
you're agreeing with me. See, I got you to come around.
Except I don't think companies should be using race and gender as a proxy for diversifying.
There you go.
And finding better talent. Don't use race. Don't use race and gender.
To think that.
Okay, let's move on to the next thing. I'm gonna take a quick. Can we take a quick break? And then we'll hop back in.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, we're back. Took a quick little break there. One quick thing I want to ask you, Mark, as an extension of what we talked before we get to COVID mandates, is do you disagree at all that there's any kind of, and this is changing now because the culture is shifting rightward and with the election of Trump, but in the past, I've seen you in podcasts sort of dismiss and scoff at the idea that conservatives or right-leaning people are being silenced or canceled or looked down upon. Do you actually not see that?
I mean, who have we not heard from? Everybody who supposedly has been quieted, we know who they are and we know what they think, right?
The bigger problem is not the celebrities, and I think that's a point worth making. It's not about Megyn Kelly or Joe Rogan and the cancellation attempts against them because they're doing really well. The point is my former high school teacher who was presenting both sides of all the arguments on abortion, gay marriage, Black Lives Matter, and climate change, and the students said they felt offended and hurt their feelings, and he's no longer teaching there. That's just one local example.
That part I think is wrong. Yeah, regardless of the topic, I think you should be able to say what you feel is right. As long as you do it within the rules, like if you go into a school board and you just start screaming pro-abortion, anti-abortion, pro-vax, anti-vax, and you violate the decorum or the rules of the circumstances, that's different, right? If you just want to say what's on your mind in the lunchroom, talking to friends, again, as long as you're not violating rules that have been specified for everybody, great. Say what you got to say.
Yeah. And do you agree that there has been a very obvious, and there's some data on this I can present to you by FIRE, this nonpartisan organization looking at free speech on college campuses, that there's been a lot of self-censoring among conservative students and faculty members and disinvitations for right-leaning and conservative speakers on campus, a lot of hostility.
But I've seen it go in a lot of different directions, not just conservatives. And everybody these days self-censors because anything you say can and will be put on social media. And so, like Milos, whatever his name is, I remember he got canceled in something. But then, there's a lot of different, it's not just conservatives.
Okay, but do you agree there has been a very definitive and obvious left-wing bias in academia that has made conservative faculty members and students disenfranchised, marginalized, discriminated against for their viewpoints. I've, by the way, experienced this anecdotally in college classrooms.
Have you ever been to an SEC school? There you go. It's the exact opposite. I go down there, I get screamed at.
Okay.
It depends on the school. Every school is different.
Okay. But you do agree that there has been discrimination and demonization.
I don't think it's unilateral. I think there's discrimination in both directions. I think there are people who are liberal and progressive. You know, and I'm not a fan of Omar Ellie, whatever her name is. She goes into an SEC school, she's going to have a hard time having a voice on anything. You know, AOC goes into a right-leaning, scenario. She's going to have a hard time having her voice heard. So, I don't think conservatives, there is discrimination against conservatives. There's discrimination against progressives. There's discrimination against everybody. Everybody's got an opinion.
I agree with that, except on average, and FIRE has done these surveys, that the bias leans far more in the other direction. This is very obvious. Academia skews left, especially the social sciences, but not just the social sciences. I live in a very conservative area, by the way, here in Canada, Chilliwack or Abbotsford, BC. Very conservative area, very strong white evangelical Christian demographic here. And the college I went to here locally, expressing anything remotely like right of center, even libertarian, was strongly looked down upon.
So
and if you didn't believe that there's,
why'd you go to that school?
Pardon?
Why'd you go to that school?
Well, it was local. It made sense because of the rise of my career and family, a bunch of different things. But anyway, there is, it's been well established by, and I can cite surveys from FIRE where they ask professors and students who faces the most amount of censorship and suppression of their ideas and demonization of their ideas. It's far more conservatives, but
that's wrong.
There are going to be.
Then that's wrong, right?
Yeah. Okay.
As long as you follow the rules, I don't think you should be demonized in any way, shape, or form.
Okay. We really want to get to COVID. Let's try to spend 25, 30 minutes on it. This is where you and I got introduced, and we had a very long email exchange on this. So there's so many things to talk about here. One way into getting into this is just your policy with the Dallas Mavericks. This is your quote in September or October of 2021. If you work for me, I require my employees to be vaccinated unless there's a doctor's reasons where they can't be. Like you, I don't want my kids to be at risk. It is your choice. It's up to you, but there's consequences that come with that. In September, the Mavericks had a health and safety protocol where fans had to show they had proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test. Do you still support mandating the COVID vaccine for your employees in October of 2021?
Oh, yeah, I would do that again in a heartbeat.
You would do that now?
Oh, not now because there's no reason to do it now. But back then, absolutely.
But you do realize at that point, and my former podcast co-host, Jay Bhattacharya, who's now the head of the NIH, I first interviewed him in August or September of 2021. And already then, there was very clear epidemiological data coming from countries like Israel and Qatar, who introduced the vaccine a little bit earlier, that even vaccinated people were getting infected. And there was no clear disparity in unvaccinated versus vaccinated in terms of transmission and infection of the disease. It was very clear in September and October that there was no community benefit to getting the COVID vaccine. And this is not just Jay. This was Martin Koldorf, Tracy Beth Hogue, world-renowned epidemiologists. So to me, that
there's a whole lot of other people other than those guys who felt completely differently.
Okay, but those people turned out to be wrong. At that time, if you looked at COVID transmission and infection rates, there's a
couple things here. There's a couple things here, right? So when the vaccine first came out in December of 2000, it was a 95% vaccine efficacy, right?
Against symptomatic infection.
Yeah, against
that's what the data showed.
Right, against infection. 95% is pretty damn good, don't you think?
The original clinical trials showed that, but then as time went on, the data clearly showed the other way, that there was not a clear.
What happened was obviously the virus mutated, and we saw what happened there. And so then what we learned about the vaccine, and all the data supported this, is that people who were vaccinated were less likely to be hospitalized. Would you agree with that?
I would draw some clear caveats there, but yes, if you looked at the broad aggregate data, it did show that. But the problem is people who took the vaccine, and this is where we went over this over our email. I don't know if you remembered, but have you heard of healthy vaccinee user bias, where people on average who get vaccinated tend to be healthier, tend to have lower obesity rates, lower rates of smoking, tend to make better health choices, have greater access to high quality medical
They're smarter
care.
is what you're saying?
Pardon?
They're smarter in how they live their lives?
I mean, there's a ton of socioeconomic factors as well.
So basically,
I
what
don't think
you're
it's just,
saying, I mean, the whole MAHA thing, right? They're more likely to be adherents of a MAHA type lifestyle, is what you're saying.
I mean, MAHA is a very particular kind of healthy. It's a very
No,
holistic.
but it's just like do what's in the best interest of your own health. You live a healthier lifestyle, and these are all the things that you're saying, right?
Vaccinated, so just concrete examples. Vaccinated people tend to be more obese. They tend to have lower rates of smoking, tend to have greater access to medical care. And so we don't have to go into this deeply, but there was a very clear disparity in people who got the COVID vaccine and who didn't.
I could have swore you said when you first went through the list that they were all positives that were associated with the lifestyles of the people who got vaccinated.
Yes.
Because obesity would not be a positive.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
So that's why I analogized it to MAHA because.
MAHA is just a very specific kind of health consciousness, which I agree with.
Food is medicine. It's just like doing the steps that are in your best interest for your own personal health. So I just want to make that point.
Yeah.
But at the same time, even though they were, for whatever reasons, people who were vaccinated are less likely, and you agree with this, to be hospitalized or die.
Yes, but the vaccinated population is on baseline much healthier.
Okay, now that's fine, but I required people to be vaccinated. Maybe you could presume that the people who work for me had those better qualities, right? And better lifestyle, whatever it may be. But I wanted them to be vaccinated because they're my responsibility. And I really prefer my employees not be in the hospital, productivity-wise, but just personal interest in them. And I prefer them not to die. And I also know that 7% of the population is immunocompromised. And they don't wear stars on their shirts saying, I'm immunocompromised. And there's a much greater percentage of people who have comorbidities that we don't know about, that aren't necessarily immunocompromised, that have had cancer or whatever. They don't qualify as immunocompromised, but they're at higher risk. And so we don't know about the grandparents, may just be old. We don't know about kids that, any of my employees who may be at greater risk for whatever reason. And so I made the decision then, and I would do it again. God help us that we don't go through this again, but I would do it again because my number one priority, nothing else. My number one priority was keep people out of the hospital and alive. And anything that had a high risk component, because remember, this isn't like a car running you over. That's not contagious. It's not slipping and falling on a knife. That's not contagious. It's not, somebody bringing in a gun, to work. That's horrific, tragic, but it's not contagious. And so because this disease was contagious, I viewed it differently than anything else. And because I don't know and I can't ask and I didn't want to ask which people, whether they were fans of the team or whether they were in the families of people who worked for me, it didn't matter to me. I wanted to keep them healthy, safe, out of the hospital and alive. That's all that mattered.
Yeah. The problem is, first of all, on the community benefit front, Jay Bhattacharya, Martin Koldorf, Tracy Beth Hogue, many world-renowned epidemiologists and scientists in this particular area realized by August, September, October, especially 2021, that there was no clear community benefit to COVID vaccination.
I don't care about community benefit. You didn't hear what I said.
No, you didn't know because you talked about grandparents who might be, you don't want to affect other people.
But that's just one line removed from the people that work for me.
Okay,
yeah,
okay,
community.
Let's talk about that then. Okay, so put aside the community benefit then, because there was not a community benefit in October. Initially, when the data came out from Pfizer and Moderna, it was like, 95% effective against symptomatic infection. Then it turned out that wanes in 2 to 3 months and goes down to zero.
So then you would agree that if everybody was pro-vaccine as of December 31st, 2020, and we had enough vaccines and everybody got vaccinated within that 3-month period before it wanes, or even after it wanes, right, within when it was still had some effectiveness, then we would never have had the number of deaths that we ended up having.
No, I'm not saying that because it's much more complicated than
No,
that.
why? Why? If it's 95% effective and you get everybody, getting that vaccine, and the numbers probably would say that the number of deaths and the number of people infected would drop dramatically, wouldn't it?
But the studies only looked at symptomatic infection. They didn't look at transmission, or they
No,
didn't look at mortality.
I'm just agreeing with you that, because that's what they proposed and that's what the initial study research said, that it had 95% vaccine effectiveness, right?
For symptomatic infection for a couple of months. That's it.
Right. No, I think it was more. I think what Pfizer and Moderna said, maybe not Pfizer, but Moderna said, if I remember reading it, that that it prevented infection 95% of the time. Not just symptomatic infection, but prevented infection. In the initial,
there's some questions around that, but okay, sure. All right, we can go with that.
Just math. If 100% of the people got the vaccine, only 5% would have the possibility of getting infected, and the likelihood of them getting infected when 95% of the other people don't have it and can't transmit it, the math would work, right? And we would not have had the number of deaths that we had. Would you agree?
Except for the vaccine showed the evidence was for symptomatic infection, potentially infection, but there's some questions around that. But when it comes to death and hospitalization, it's very different. And then we get into relative risk reduction versus
I'm just saying, you said we'll agree that, and you said maybe there's some question, but we'll agree that it was 95% effective as a vaccine for transmission. Just math. Basic math.
For infection.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a couple of months.
Yeah, so basic math said within that window of a couple months, everybody would have gotten vaccinated. Nobody got bitched about it and said, let's do, what do they call it? When
my body, my choice?
No, natural immunity.
Natural immunity?
Yeah. Nobody said a word about that. If everybody, I just want to make sure we're on the same page. If everybody, 100% of people who could get vaccinated did get vaccinated within that 3-month period, COVID would have died in 3 months.
No, that's not clear at all. The virus mutated.
You agreed that was the fact.
I'm saying that's what the original clinical trials showed, a 95% efficacy on symptomatic infection. Problem is the virus mutated over time.
It didn't mutate within the first 3 months.
Yeah, whatever the time frame was.
That time frame matters.
Sure. Yeah.
We're doing math here. All we're doing is math. And we're saying we could have vaccinated 95% of the people, it would have been within that 3-month period before the effectiveness waned. COVID would have been gone in 3 to 6 months, right?
It wouldn't have been gone because the virus still would have mutated.
No, you would have got it. There would have been nobody to communicate it. There had been nobody to transmit it because they had all gotten the vaccine.
But other countries that had far higher vaccination rates, they still had community transmission.
Talking about within the first 3 months, though. The vaccine, that first vaccine before it mutated, that was designed for the alpha version. I don't remember all the names of them all. But they would have all captured them. If they would have had access to the vaccines, it would be gone.
Okay, but except for other countries that had far higher rates of vaccine uptake, the virus
also
still spread.
Timing that matters. It's not just higher vaccine uptake rates. It's absolute uptake. There's a big difference, right? Getting 60% of your population, okay. Getting 100%, which is what we're talking about here, 100% of everybody that could physically take it without consequences of taking it itself, right? COVID would be gone. Would have been gone in 3 months.
Your hypothetical is wrong on multiple counts. One is just the risk benefit analysis. First of all, it didn't make sense for everyone to get the COVID vaccine, and particularly the serious adverse event rates.
You can make it disappear in 3 months doesn't make sense.
Are you aware of the risk benefit profile?
Yes.
And so we went over this over email. So the COVID vaccines, the best available data we have is by Joseph Freeman and colleagues. Joseph Freeman is a top senior science advisor to Jay Bhattacharya now, and he co-authored a peer-reviewed study in the journal Vaccine on serious adverse events associated with the mRNA vaccines. Him and Sander Greenland from UCLA, John Kaplan from Stanford, world-renowned epidemiologists.
Notice that everybody that agrees with you, you call world-renowned. Everybody who doesn't, you have named.
Scientists who are sensible, okay?
So the ones that agree with you are sensible, and the ones who don't are not?
It's the other way around. It's the ones that are talking sense. It's my position is only based on the best science, not on
nobody else is using good science, right?
If the vaccines had no issue of myocarditis, they didn't have as high of a serious adverse event rate as they did, which I'll get into in a second, then I would support it.
If you could have ended COVID in 3 months, because that was prior to the study showing the myocarditis, right? That was prior. No, you had some folks, because Pfizer had some issues on the single shot with younger kids. So it would have had to have been Moderna, but so it's obviously a hypothetical, but COVID could have been gone if we didn't have the resistance that we had to the shot.
Again, other countries had much higher rates of vaccination early on,
but
like
Israel. They all got it either at the same time or later. And
Israel got it earlier.
Israel got it earlier?
As far as I remember, Israel had earlier vaccination.
So. I think they might have got it at the same time, and they certainly tracked it better. But and they were the ones who showed that and again, I didn't prepare anything. I didn't look up anything. I'm doing this all from memory. And they were the ones that said with their own with the insurance company that it prevented hospitalization, whatever the high percentage was, right?
Yeah. Israel did start earlier in December than the United States and Canada and other countries.
Math is the math, Rob. It's just a math question. If you have 95%,
your math is wrong.
No, if you have 95% effectiveness and it's equally distributed across the country to 100% of eligible people, it would be gone. That's the way vaccines work now. That's the way all vaccines work now.
You think we would have gotten zero COVID?
If 100% of the people, that's what the math says. Now, is it reasonable to think 100% of people would take it? No, that's just life. But if they had, if we would have seen a rash of support for the vaccine as opposed to opposition, and everybody would have got it, the first version before the first mutation, I think COVID would be gone.
But except the virus mutates, and people still.
Like I said, we had access to it. Maybe we didn't have enough shots, but we had access to it prior to the mutations.
The studies only looked at symptomatic infection, okay? And just because you take the vaccine doesn't mean you can't get a future strain of COVID.
You're more of an expert. You can only transmit if you're symptomatic, right?
The different epidemiologists say different things, but in theory, you could be non-symptomatic and still transmit.
Okay. But again, when it's 95% efficacy.
For symptomatic infection. That's what Pfizer and Moderna showed, not infection broadly.
I think what they said was infection. I don't think they said symptomatic.
It was 100% symptomatic. Okay. We can look at it right now.
Okay.
It was symptomatic infection.
I'll defer to you then. But in any event, then the odds of us getting rid of COVID very quickly would have been drastically higher. And I say that because you talk about the lack of symmetric information on both sides. I think it goes the other way. In this case, there was so much anti-vax information, the whole my body, my choice thing coming out, that really hurt how we dealt with the virus.
Okay. We have limited time, so let's try to get through this quickly. The best peer-reviewed research we have on serious adverse events associated with the vaccine is this one study by Joseph Freeman and colleagues, UCLA, Stanford, University of Maryland researchers, etc., who reanalyzed Pfizer and Moderna's own original clinical trials, and they looked at and they used a universally certified, esteemed metric created by it's called the Brighton organization, endorsed by the WHO, a standard list of serious adverse events that's widely agreed upon by scientists. And they found a 1 in 800 serious adverse event rate associated with the COVID vaccines.
Did they pull this data from VAERS, or where did they pull the data?
No. They looked at Pfizer and Moderna's original clinical trials, okay? They found a 1 in 800 serious adverse event rate. That is orders of magnitude higher than other vaccines on the market, which are at a rate of about 1 per million or 2 per million. Other vaccines.
When did they do the study?
This was published in 2022. I'm pretty sure. I don't think it was 2023. It was 2022. I interviewed the lead author at the time. We did a 4-hour podcast.
Why did people not accept it?
Because it didn't go with their narrative that vaccines are universal good.
Science is science, right? What would the people on the other side with a different opinion say, and why? So if I went on Twitter or X and looked to see why people disagreed with it, what would they say?
There was a very clear pro-vaccine bias, and people did not want to look at any data that showed harms, particularly people who encouraged.
100% of everybody that disagreed was just wrong. It's just their bias.
As always, there's going to be some limitations to some studies. So I'll grant you
Okay.
there were some limitations in the study, as any study, but that finding was incredibly alarming. And they went to the FDA and they had a meeting with the FDA.
And what did other countries do in response to that study? What did Qatar do? What did Israel do in response to the study?
So they published their study, but it was not taken seriously by public health authorities who already committed to mandating.
In other countries that you said did it differently. So Qatar, who tracks every single human being in the country and has complete control, dismissed that study. Israel.
I don't know if they found out about the study. I don't know what Qatar did with that.
You're saying the doctors in Qatar, the doctors in Israel, the doctors throughout Europe, when it came out on archive where all these things came out, right, ignored it.
So they went to the FDA and they went to, I forget what it's called, the European Medicine Agency. They went to an EU body as well. Okay. And for whatever reason, they did not take their concerns seriously. That there was a 1-800.
Reasons are important.
Yes.
So, I mean, the reasons why they didn't take, do you think the only possible explanation for why they didn't implement whatever the suggestion was, obviously I haven't read the report. The only reason that they ignored it is because they had a narrative they had to fill.
If you have all your chips in the bucket of mandating, enforcing, and telling everyone to get vaccinated,
every country around the world.
I don't think every country in the world saw that study. Okay. Some countries saw that study.
Scientists in those countries, you get my point, right? It's to me, it's ludicrous to believe that there isn't a scientist somewhere in every country whose job is to work for the Minister of Health or be the Minister of Health, who isn't paying attention to every single study that's released. They're not going to just ignore it. And so,
first of all, there were other countries that did end up acknowledging this. Okay, the German health minister, he came out a couple years ago and said the vaccines have actually caused serious damage in some people, and that was our blanket policy was not appropriate. That's one example I remember off the top of my head. International
in Germany.
I don't think he was fired, but he talked about it. He talked about this openly. So that's just one example. But the point here is that they went to the FDA, and the FDA, they completely went against what the data was showing. And you had people within the FDA who were pointing this out and were saying that it's the risk benefit analysis is not what.
And I accept that. Right? I accept that that's what the FDA did because I don't know any better. And if they did, they did. But my point is, when people condemn Fauci and the FDA and whatever misadventures they perceive to have happened, real or otherwise, right? Then I ask the question, what about every other country in the world? What is it that they did in response? And to me, in my opinion, just to dismiss it because they've bought into the narrative, with the exception of one guy in Germany, that's not really an answer.
Okay. Also, by the way, you realize other European countries had a far more sensible, not perfect, but far more sensible vaccine policy.
Some of them were.
They recommended often to 65 plus, 75 plus. They did not have broad blanket recommendations for young healthy
had recommendations.
Countries like Sweden and Finland.
Right, but the culture of Sweden and Finland is dramatically different than our culture. And so when they made recommendations, it was still like an 80. Again, I'm doing this from memory. An 80+% uptake of the vaccine.
Okay, but they had far more sensible policies on recommending to young people in particular.
It was night and day from ours.
Epidemiology is epidemiology, and your risk for COVID is your risk for COVID if you're 19 or 25. Okay. But the point is, and I'll just tell you this quickly, Dr. Philip Krauss at the FDA, who I've interviewed on my podcast, he was one of the few people at the FDA who was sounding the alarms on why these blanket approvals and recommendations, especially for young people, for boosters, it does not make sense. And the risk-benefit analysis is not, benefit-risk analysis is not favorable in young people. But the FDA overruled these experts, and they wanted an expedited review of the Pfizer vaccine approval. And when Philip Krauss and Marion Gruber, when they said, we need more time, it's because the White House was pressuring the FDA to approve the COVID vaccines as soon as possible so they could mandate it for the military. That whole process was completely backwards and completely unethical when you have Biden in 2021 coming out and saying, we're going to approve the boosters before the FDA finished their review of the boosters, for example. And when they pressured the FDA to approve the vaccines as soon as possible. And so Philip Krause, him and Marion Gruber, they were the two individuals responsible for finishing the review. They said, we need more time and we can't do this as quickly. We want to look at the data carefully. But then Peter Marks and other people, they overruled them and sidelined them and said, okay, we're going to take a look at this. You guys go away, even though they were the pro-vaccine experts. And so you had this very clear political incentive pushed down by the White House, by the Biden administration, to approve and license the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines as soon as possible.
Why do you think they did
appropriate scientific evidence?
Why?
Well,
you can stop reading.
By their own admission, they wanted to mandate it. Emails showed.
What was their mission? Did they get paid under the table by Moderna and Pfizer? Was that why?
I can't read their minds, so okay. I don't know what exactly.
So do you think maybe based off the information they were getting, they were trying to minimize the number of deaths and hospitalizations in the country?
That's why you go to the FDA and CDC. As flawed as a lot of the people in charge of those places were, you go to the FDA, and the FDA said we needed more time to approve the Pfizer Moderna vaccine.
And at the same time,
and they said we need it now.
Were people dying?
Yes.
How many people were dead and dying at the time?
There were a lot of people dying from and with COVID. That's another issue.
If you're president of the United States, well, you can't because you're Canadian. But if you were president of Canada, right, Premier Canada, you took Trudeau's place instead of whoever the guy that got elected is, right? And you were responsible and Canadians were dying. Would you maybe err on the side of doing something faster if you had people telling you this will reduce the number of deaths and hospitalizations?
You can go faster. It was, first of all, it was already happening faster. The EUA makes it faster. This was not a normal
That's not
vaccine
the question I asked you. That's not.
It was already okay. It was already faster, first of all. But then, second of all, yes, that's what the FDA and the CDC. That's what they're for, is to study these things and to approve them.
Not the point. You're going to have people who disagree. I'm sure there are people in the FDA who disagree with them. And you had somebody who had one position, and I'm sure you had other people in the FDA who had another position. And if Rob is the president, Prime Minister of Canada, and Rob has a responsibility for people living or dying. Living or dying.
But you're oversimplifying. Until you do a complete review of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines and the boosters, especially, until you do a complete scientific review, you don't fully know how many people you're going to save and the risk-benefit profile and who's it for, 65 plus or under 25.
With you, Rob, you know that. You know that there are people who, and I would be one of them, based off of what I read at the time, who felt that the odds were in the favor of getting the vaccine. That we both we both agreed just a little bit ago that it was 95% effective. And so based off of we not knowing what mutation is coming or when, right, we try to get it out to as many people as possible, and it did save lives. And so then when it mutated, we had to do our best, because I think the first mutation was stronger and scarier and was killing people at an accelerated rate, if I remember correctly. And so if you're in the position of responsibility, and it's easy to say, wait on the FDA, really easy. But when the droplets are flying, right, and people are dying, and you have to make a decision, it's not quite just a matter of, okay, let's wait on this one to get the FDA. It's like measles right now. Right.
Yeah. But we're missing the point, though. That specific scenario was for mandates. The vaccine was already available, but in order to mandate it, they needed the full licensure. And the full licensure was pending the review by the top scientist at the FDA, who I interviewed on my podcast, Philip Krause. You can talk to him if you want. And he said, we need more time for the review of this vaccine.
But again,
but Peter Marks, and coming from the White House, they said, we need this as soon as possible so we can mandate it for the military in a group of people, mostly young men who are healthy, under the age of 30 and 40, who had no clear benefit. And that's with young people where I'm most concerned about.
So again, why did I do it? Because you might look at an individual or a demographic or an age group and say, kids on campuses don't need it. Kids who are just gotten to the military don't need it. That was a mistake. They don't need it. If you just looked at that just from that, okay, you're right. But those same people come into contact who are at greater risk. And just 7% of I don't know what the number is in the military, but 7% of the population in the United States is immunocompromised. And again, we don't identify them and we didn't do anything. So
We already talked about community benefit. You said I didn't
Yeah,
do
but
for
that's not
community
about
benefit.
community benefit. It's in the military is not community benefit. In the military, again, I don't know the people who are not enlisted. Maybe they're the ones that work in the office buildings. Maybe they're the ones that take out the trash that are non-enlisted, right?
By community benefit, we're saying transmission. And I'm saying by September and October, scientists like Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Kulldorff saw that the vaccine was not protective against symptomatic infection. And so those immunocompromised
there were
people.
a lot of people who disagreed with
could
that.
have been.
A lot of people around the world disagreed.
Okay, yeah, but it turns out that those people, Jay and Martin,
So, but you
Marty
can only
McCary,
make
Tracy
decisions
Bethel, they were vindicated on that.
So maybe they were, right? But you can only make the decisions based off the information available to you. And when you're responsible for people living and dying, you're going to err on the side of caution. If it means people, who are younger, who don't directly benefit as much, but you're doing it and you're protecting those around you because you don't know who may be at risk, if you're responsible for all those lives, do you know what it's like to have a death on your head, let alone 100,000 or 1 million? Do you think that would impact your decision making, Rob?
Yes, but the problem is the people that you were listening to were wrong. Peter Hotez, Eric Topol, Nicholas Christakis.
You're doing it in
No, not hindsight. At the time, I spoke to Jay Bhattacharya, and I did articles on this at the time. And this is
articles on it. That's great, but you have to make a decision. You have to make a decision.
Yes.
Right? And there are millions.
The problem is you consulted with the wrong people. Peter Hotez.
Okay, then we can argue that they made a mistake, and you're making your point that they made a mistake. But the people making the decisions did it from the right place and they did it with the best information.
Okay, you did it from the right place. I'll give you that.
They did it with the best information that they had available to them. And they would most likely do it the exact same way again, because the information they had available to them. And I get what you're saying, that this guy published this and the one guy from the FDA. So you've said this one paper with Mary and Jay or whatever.
I gave you 2 examples.
You gave me 2 examples, 5 papers, 10 papers. There was just as much counterbalancing information, right, from the people supporting the vaccines globally.
Except they were wrong.
It wasn't like, but it wasn't like Israel were saying, we're not giving out the vaccines anymore. Qatar wasn't saying, we're not giving out the vaccines anymore. Sweden and Finland didn't mandate it, but they knew they would have 88% uptake because that's the culture. And again, I didn't prepare for this, so I don't know specifics. This I'm doing as
they didn't push it on young people nearly as much as we did in Canada and the United States. They did not push it on young people nearly as much as we did. They had more specific carve-outs. Okay. And so and this leads to and so I'm saying at the time, if you had spoken to Jay Bhattacharya, he would have given you a very different take on what was happening. And he was right.
That's the way it works. That's the way science works. You get different takes and people make determinations. And my point is, like when we were talking about DEI, it's far more difficult when it's your responsibility.
I agree, it's difficult.
Protect the lives of millions, 330 million people, right? And there are people dying at a rapid rate. And
yes, it's a hard situation. But people like Jay Bhattacharya, he was deboosted on X. He was attacked on Stanford. He had death threats on campus, right? Professors like that.
But that didn't affect what.
By the way, he did studies on this. He did seroprevalence studies showing that actually COVID is far more infectious and pervasive than what was being reported at the time. And so he reported a much lower infection fatality rate in his studies with John Ioannidis from Stanford. And those studies were vindicated, by the way.
But why didn't that impact people in other countries who didn't have the same hierarchy that we do here?
Well, other countries like Sweden, they didn't have these strict mandates on young people.
Because, as I said, and you can ask them, because I've read it, maybe I read the wrong stuff, their culture is different. They have a culture of adherence.
Okay, that might be one reason why.
Right.
Yeah, or they have a better reading of the science. It's possible too.
Yeah, but look at other countries. The other, however many countries that there are, why didn't they change the behavior and just say, okay, here we go, Bhattacharya, this paper is it. We're following you. Why? Why not? And the only point is,
scientists make big mistakes. Smoking in the past.
It is what it is. It's
pharmaceutical drugs get pulled off the market all the time that scientists support.
Up with this, but if you feel he's been vindicated, he feels he's been vindicated, great, more power to him. But when you're in the battle at the time, as you agreed with, you do the best that you can.
Yes,
I did. I had 20,000 people I was responsible for, plus thousands and thousands of employees and their families. I was going to err on the side of caution. I read everything at the time, including that paper, right? I remember reading it. And so,
clearly you did not read everything. Otherwise you would have come with a different
everything that came up on archive, everything, because I was responsible.
You read Jay Bhattacharya's papers?
Yes, I read them all, the Barrington, whatever it's called.
Great Barrington Declaration. Yeah. And you weren't convinced by that?
No, because there was just as many people on the other side, many more, who didn't agree with it either. And
that's your way of judging the truth, is what the proportion of people with each opinion is? Or is it what's the most sensible, rational read of the data? That's what should matter, whether that's 1 versus 100, right?
So
that's what matters.
Not sensible, and when I read the data, my read of the data is not sensible, but yours is.
Well, we're talking about
DEI is right, mine is wrong. I should change it.
The people who originated DEI.
Did you realize, Rob, all the people that diminished what other people were saying, and you're criticizing them for diminishing it? You're doing the exact same thing. You're saying that your position is sensible on DEI and on this, right? And that all sensible people who read it came to the same conclusion. You're just as bad as the people who wouldn't let Jay and others speak.
No. I'm just saying it matters what read of the data you have. And this leads to the last thing for young people in particular. So you were attacking Joe Rogan at the time, to circle back to how we started. And so that's how we had our exchange. And from what I remember, that exchange with Joe was saying at the time that for young, healthy people, they don't need the vaccine.
Right.
And you were attacking him.
Right,
he was talking about myocarditis.
Right. For the reasons I just said.
In retrospect, Joe was completely right about that. For young people, the infection fatality rate was 0.003%.
But it wasn't about
people who were dying and being hospitalized with COVID. But again, it was mostly young people with multiple comorbidities and obesity.
Yes.
For him to say that healthy young people don't need the vaccine, he was
wrong.
100% right about that.
No, he's wrong.
And Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Kulldorff, they endorsed his position on that.
No, because they could communicate the disease to other people. That's what matters. They could be with their grandparents. They could go to school. They could go to a Mavs game, right? And they could infect other people. We don't know what.
Vaccinated people were also spreading COVID.
Again, and the whole point, they might have been, but it was less than, fewer people. And we did our best. And we tested. Remember, you had to have a recent test to come into a Mavs game. We didn't just say you had to be vaccinated. You had to have a test. And so we accepted both once we were able to test quickly. And so
if you had just done the test, that would have been more sensible, because some vaccinated people were also spreading the virus. You should have just done the test.
Either
by the
way, the point is, it's not about just this is an infectious disease, right? It's infectious.
Yeah.
It's communicative.
And within a few months, the protection against infection wanes to zero.
Not the point. It's communicative. And so because it is an infectious disease, one person can communicate it to not just one other person, but lots of other people as well.
Regardless of vaccination.
Whatever it was, and vaccination reduced the probability of that happening. Now,
for a couple months.
For a couple months. And so we asked to see your vaccination status, knowing for that couple months that your ability to infect others is reduced. Would you agree with that?
For a couple months, yes.
Okay, so for a couple months, if kids were vaccinated, they could see grandma, and if every grandma 80 years old is going to have some level of comorbidity. Somebody working in their 60s at the grocery store, at the cafeteria, right, probably has comorbidities as well. And do you think
then they should get the vaccine? If it's so protective, then why do they have to rely on other people around them to get it?
They should get the vaccine, and they did get the vaccine, but still, like you said, it's not 100%. And the more comorbidities you have, the more risk you are. And so some of us decided that it is worth it to protect those people and to protect the unknown number of people, right? Because the vaccine helped. The vaccine was self-protective to keep you out of the hospital and keep you from dying, but you couldn't know exactly when its efficacy wore down. And so there was risk associated with that. If you were erring on the side of keeping as many people out of the hospital and alive as you could, then you're going to say, even though it doesn't have a big impact on you personally, it's still worth it to protect others around you. And that was the messaging.
Right. Except that when you instituted this policy to mandate it for your staff, that was October. By then, the vaccine was already radically waning, the efficacy against symptomatic infection.
No, because we knew that the disease was going to keep on mutating, and we didn't know what the efficacy of the next vaccine was going to be. and the impact that it would have. And so I wasn't going to switch in and out. Okay, this vaccine's good enough. That vaccine's not good enough. And so it was a policy that worked for us. And from my perspective, I wanted to keep everybody out of the hospital and alive.
Right. But so
All
again,
you're saying is for the youngest population, their risk of dying or being hospitalized is far lower.
Well, I was going to get to that. But first of all, just again,
you're not saying that, there isn't as much or not greater risk to the people with comorbidities and immunocompromised. You haven't said anything about protecting them at all.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, the vaccine, it's vaccine benefit versus vaccine risk. And we can circle back to risk because it's, in theory, it could be very beneficial, but for some people, they could get vaccine side effects. So you have to factor those two things in, as you know, right? But for older people, if the vaccine was as protective as the authorities said it was, then they should have gotten it. Okay. But the problem is in October, when you mandated your staff to get the COVID vaccine, it was very clear at that point that the vaccine efficacy against symptomatic infection had waned down to 5-10%.
It was also very clear there were going to be more mutations and more boosters. And it was also very clear that we couldn't, I couldn't know, nobody knew what the efficacy of those new vaccines were going to be. Agree?
Okay. Right, but the efficacy for symptomatic infection was almost zero when you mandated it. So I'm saying it didn't make sense.
It was never almost zero. It was never almost zero.
The vaccine was, most Americans, they got the vaccine during the summer months, I believe, June, July, August, and in October you mandated it. By that time already, the vaccine efficacy was waning significantly.
So we had at the MBA, they had epidemiologists left and right coming in and explaining all the data and everything. And so we did what every other MBA team did, and I was fully for it because that's what the data told us. Now, you might disagree with that.
Yeah, I do. And so does Jay and Martin and Tracy Beth Hogan, Marty Makary, who's the FDA commissioner.
Names I know Jay's great. Some of those names I know, and I wouldn't trust them to.
You think Jay's great?
Yeah, I like Jay, right? But okay. I think some of the names on that list, I wouldn't trust them to make me an omelet, right? I don't think they're objective. But
I just name people that I fully. Jay, Marty Makary, who's the head of the FDA, Vinay Prasad. Yeah, Vinay Prasad's at FDA. Tracy Beth Hogan's at FDA. A lot of people.
Yeah, Tracy. I'm not going to go into names, but there's some of those people on the list. I don't think that they're objective, but that was based off of me reading multiple years ago.
Okay. We've been over the community benefit, but for people that you mandated to get the COVID vaccine, if any of them had a serious adverse event, would you be willing to compensate them for?
I didn't have any that had one, and I don't know if I'd be willing to compensate them for. We have insurance, and they could take it up with insurance, and we didn't have any of that at all.
Okay, all right. And as far as your criticism of Joe Rogan for saying that healthy vax,
I don't remember what I said, but yeah, I stand by in terms of I think kids should have got it as well, not because of their own protection, but for the protection of those around them. And I get your point that
that's not how medicine works. You have to prioritize your own health. And we knew there was a risk profile for kids with myocarditis, and later the FDA acknowledged there was a risk with post-vaccination, an elevated rate of stroke.
And would you agree that there was a greater risk of myocarditis for people who had COVID than those who only got the vaccine and didn't have COVID?
Okay, so this was the center of our debate. Okay, over email.
I don't.
So if you want to get it, okay, yeah. So we this was what we debated at length, and so if you want to get into it, we can get into it briefly. So the multiple cardiologists I've interviewed, including some that would be willing to talk to you, by the way, Dr. Anish Koka, he's a cardiologist in Philadelphia, who I interviewed a lot.
I remember you mentioning that guy. Yeah, that was your go-to guy. Yeah.
He administered the COVID vaccine at his clinic, including to young people, and later regretted it because he realized that he did not properly account for the safety data, and that the FDA and the CDC, their recommendations and what they were doing was often very misleading and deceptive. And so he and I have gone back, and multiple other cardiologists, Dr. Asim Malhotra, world-renowned cardiologist, Dr. Venk Murthy, another great cardiologist. Okay.
Notice so all the people that you agree with are world-renowned great cardiologists, and the people who don't agree with you don't get mentioned in the conversation.
The problem is when you say that, you're saying it backwards. It's my opinion is based on what the best scientists are saying.
Yeah, and my opinion at the time was the same. Not just my opinion, but also from the MBA. We had every financial interest to not do any of that, to go into the bubble. And when was the January of 21 was the bubble? I forget. But we had every financial interest not to do any of this.
Yeah. Okay. So on the myocarditis point, I've talked about this on many podcasts years ago. This feels like we're going back into like ancient history. It feels like almost. But COVID myocarditis is very different from vaccine-induced myocarditis, because COVID myocarditis, that kind of myocarditis, and Anish Koka talked at length about, it was a very non-traditional form of myocarditis. That form of myocarditis is typically in older individuals with multiple comorbidities who are in the hospital, who then also have some level of inflammation in their heart. Their heart's beating really fast. They have multiple conditions going on.
And see what they say. Put
Okay.
in ChatGPT. Let's put in ChatGPT.
Put what in? What?
We're going to say, what should be
COVID myocarditis versus vaccine-induced myocarditis?
Yeah. What is?
If you want, I could even get Anish Koka on the line.
I don't care. No, I don't care. No, that's good. What is the risk prior?
Let's just talk about it then.
Of COVID-induced myocarditis versus COVID vaccine-induced myocarditis.
I went over this data 100 times, so whatever you pull up, we can discuss it.
I don't know if you can see it, but I want you to see the prompt.
Okay. All right, sure.
The risk profile market for COVID-19 and vaccination varies significantly by age, sex, and health status, but here's the best available summary from large-scale studies and meta-analysis as of 2024. From COVID general population for young males, okay? High infection-related risk, unvaccinated individual. So highest vaccine-related risk, males. So basically it says that the incidence per million of COVID-19 infection, myocarditis per million for COVID infection is 450 to 600.
Let me just explain this to you. There's some nuances there. Okay.
Wait, no, it says they're different. And so, again, this is as objective as I can find, right? So 500 to 300. So
what would be more objective is to get a cardiologist on the line, but
so the cardiologist has one perspective, and so it's twice as much. Here,
ChatGPT isn't always correct, but okay, let's see what it. Okay, okay, yeah, okay. So let me. Yeah, so I've been over this data.
Twice as likely to occur for.
Okay. So let me.
Under 29.
Yes. So let me explain this to you. So I've written multiple articles on this back in the day. So COVID myocarditis is primarily in high-risk individuals who have multiple comorbidities, typically older individuals, but could occur in younger individuals as well. That's a very different risk group compared to healthy young males in particular, but also young women.
Now limit the question to exclusively young men, healthy, under the age of 29. Same, double from COVID versus from vaccine.
Listen, if we're going to do this, it's going to take a long time. I was on ChatGPT last couple of days, re-looking at some COVID data, and it hallucinated multiple times to me, by the way, on COVID infection fatality rate.
I just thought it would be an objective source.
Sure. Yeah, I use ChatGPT a lot, and I was surprised how wrong it's been recently on a few things. But infection-induced myocarditis, again, within the healthy population, often more serious, chest pain, shortness of breath, arrhythmia. And vaccine-induced, usually mild, moderate chest pain, resolved in days, weeks. Hospitalization under infection-induced myo, common, especially if moderate, severe COVID. Vaccine-induced, 90 to 95% recover at home or with brief hospital stay. Long-term damage for infection-induced, documented in some, more common. Vaccine-induced, rare, especially with early treatment. Death, rare, but more likely than from vaccine. And then extremely rare vaccine-induced myocarditis death, extremely rare fatal fatalities, less than 0.1%, if any. So is there a chance? Now, maybe that's hallucinating, but here, let's see if it has sources. You got to go to specific studies, and I know you got to go soon, so we can't.
That's what this is using. It's not.
We could spend 1 hour doing this if you want. By the way, and by the way, you could bring your cardiologist. I could bring my cardiologist.
I'm going to do studies, right? And that's what I looked at before. You bring up individuals and say you believe them for whatever reason, and then you.
Okay, we can bring up studies,
teams, right?
We can do studies.
Cardiologists.
Okay,
would you agree?
We can do studies too.
Okay, so put that all aside. We'll just assume this is all hallucination. Would you?
No, I'm not saying it's all. I'm not saying it's all hallucination. The devil's always in the details.
Doesn't matter.
So countries like different countries had different studies. Countries like South Korea that had a much more active surveillance method for capturing adverse events. They found several individuals who died from vaccine-induced myocarditis. That there was an underreporting happening. In the United States, they have passive surveillance, and so you're much less likely to capture cases of vaccine-induced myocarditis, etc.
That there are world-renowned cardiologists who disagree with your world-renowned cardiologist.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all.
Yes. Yeah. And I think they were wrong. Okay.
Okay. And that's fair. You're allowed to think they're wrong. I'm allowed to think that your guys are wrong.
Okay. Well. Yeah. And you can bring your guys. I can bring my guys.
And they can argue that. I'm sure they've gone to conferences and argued it out already. Right. We'll let that stay for the cardiology.
By the way, as a side note, there was one individual I was talking to today. I put out a reader call out for anyone who has questions for you. And one individual said he'd be willing to bet you $10 million about the COVID vaccine risk profile. And particularly, he's saying that the COVID vaccine cost more lives than they saved. And he said he's willing to put $10 million on the line. Yeah. And he said you could bring your expert. He could bring his expert. I don't have
experts, right? I'm not trying to look at experts and do this, right? Obviously, he believes in what he believes. And most likely, he's going to say, my position is most sensible. And there's going to be somebody whose position is, they're going to say he's going to say whoever this guy is doesn't know what he's talking about. You can find both sides, and there's no one's going to come to a conclusion that one any more than we came to a conclusion.
Yeah. This is Steve Kirsch, by the way.
I don't care. I don't know who he is. I don't care.
Yeah, similar to you, he's a pretty big net worth, and he was saying you could bring your expert, he could bring his expert, then you could have mutually agreed. You could have mutually agreed judges to decide. Anyway,
that's ridiculous.
The only thing on COVID myocarditis was studies done by Tracy Beth Hogue and Allison Krug, many other individuals, showed that for young males, the risk for COVID vaccine myocarditis was twice as likely as hospitalization from COVID.
I'm not trying to disparage them, even though it'll come across that way. Before they did the study, they were already against it, weren't they?
No, not at all.
Tracy,
I know Tracy well. She's at the FDA now.
Isn't the one HO with the slash through it, ANG that worked in Denmark or whatever?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she's a rock solid scientist. She actually came on my podcast and debated another guy who was claiming that the COVID vaccine cost 17 million lives, and she was on the other side. She was saying that your paper is pretty flawed and not showing that there's some massive mass killing happening with the COVID vaccines.
In my opinion,
she's not anti-vaccine by any stretch, by the way.
The takeaway is that you can find people in either position. The hard part was when the shit was going down and people were dying. Everybody, like we both agree on, including me, made the best decisions that they could. And we created our own parameters that, in my case, I felt like my only goal, all I cared about was keeping people that I was responsible for from dying or going to the hospital. Nothing else.
Yeah. The only point other on myocarditis is that, as I was trying to explain to you earlier, COVID myocarditis particularly occurs in individuals with multiple comorbidities who get COVID.
Well, we limited this here. I'll ask the same question.
For vaccine myocarditis, that particularly affected young people. Okay, so those are two very different groups of people.
Per million males under the age of 29 and healthy.
So there's multiple studies that show that vaccine myocarditis was a far greater risk in young, healthy people than
we'll go to Grok, right?
COVID myocarditis. But the thing is, we can do this if you want, but this is going to take an hour. So
no, I mean we're finishing up anyways, right? I'm just curious.
Okay. I can send you peer-reviewed studies after this. You can send me your studies, and we can.
I don't have any studies. I'm just asking, Grok.
Yeah. Which is sometimes right, sometimes wrong, as I've found out.
Well, they all are. Well, it's not worth wasting time. It hasn't come up yet, but okay. You're curious.
And then last thing, just on the COVID front, John Ioannidis, professor at Stanford, he has written a widely accepted peer-reviewed study on the infection fatality rate of COVID. And at the time, Jay Bhattacharya and John Ioannidis at Stanford, they were publishing these studies showing an infection fatality rate of 0.035% in the non-elderly population, 0 to 59. And then when you go by age, if you go by 20 to 29, it was 0.003%. If you go to people in their 30s, it was 0.011%. And you put that against a 1 in 800 serious adverse event rate, according to the best data, it did not make sense. Like, you weren't saving lives by giving it to healthy people.
Again,
Right? If you look at
people,
immunocompromised people and people with multiple comorbidities, it's a different situation. But for healthy and particularly young people, there was no clear benefit of vaccinating, and there was an abnormally high rate of risk.
Do people who are healthy interact with people with comorbidities and who are immunocompromised?
Yes, but the vaccines didn't stop the spread. We've already been over this.
The vaccines stop the spread initially and then minimize the spread. And what you're saying what you're saying,
then it went to zero in a couple months.
Every country in the world was stupid.
Most countries in the world did not have sensible COVID policies. If people listen to Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Koldorf, who you said you like, by the way, we would have had very different policies. I don't necessarily
agree with everything, but I like them.
Okay. Yeah. And so, particularly for young people, there was the risk of myocarditis.
Rob, you just said that pretty much every country in the world wasn't sensible.
Do you have any mistakes science has made in the past?
Okay. When everybody's making the same mistake.
Some countries did it better. Sweden did it better. Finland did it better. Denmark did it better.
We talked about that. You noticed that they're grouped together there. But okay. But when everybody else, look, it's fine. We'll disagree on this, and we'll let again, I haven't looked at it in a long time, and you obviously spent a lot more time with it than I have since I had to deal with it with the Mavs, right? But at the same time, I listened to everybody who had exact opposite positions that you do. And
I listened to those people too. And people like Peter Hotez, Eric Topa, I listened to them. Nicholas Christakis, I was reading all their work. Jay Bhattacharya was far more correct. And Martin Koldorf.
You determined that Jay was more correct. I determined the NBA.
And many other people.
Right.
Yeah.
And the NBA and myself and others came to the opposite conclusion. That's just the way it is, right? That's the way science works.
Sure. But if you spoke to Jay in September and October, I bet you might have made a different decision on mandating it for your staff.
Probably not.
Probably not? By the way, when I spoke to Jay, I had no anti-vax, no pro-vax. I'm like, hey, tell him, like, I'm curious about this. I'm learning this for the first time. Spoke to Tracy. I spoke to Peter Hotez online. Many other people pro-vaccine and anti-COVID vaccine. And then I came to my own conclusion. I bet if you'd spoken to Jay, you would have not mandated it for your players.
Probably not, but you never know because it's all hypothetical.
And again, your criticisms against Joe Rogan, again, he said young, healthy people they don't need the vaccine.
I disagree.
Turns out he was right.
No,
for young, healthy people.
Again, you look at it as an individual person, and that's where we disagree. And then you say that the vaccine did prevent communication with transmission, which suggests that there's no reason to take the vaccine at all, and except for your own personal protection, because there's nothing you could do to even minimize the risk of transmission. There's a lot of people who disagree with you on that.
Yeah, you were minimizing transmission for a couple of months, and then you weren't.
Again, we went to having tests, but at the same time, anything I could do to reduce the number of hospitalizations and deaths. And every bit of data that I could find around the world, including Israel and Qatar, when they published all their data, confirmed the exact same thing. The more vaccinated the population, the fewer the deaths and hospitalization. That has never been in doubt anywhere. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, except there's so many confounders to observational data, as you would well know.
Even within you take whatever confounders you want.
The healthy vaccine user bias was a big part of why you were seeing disparities in health outcomes. Vaccinated people on baseline are much healthier than unvaccinated people. Right?
Yeah, and that says a lot in a lot of ways, but suggests a lot of things. But at the same time, there hasn't been. I'm gonna stick to my guns. And
okay, all right.
Every bit of data that I've seen and everything that I've read said if you're unvaccinated, regardless, healthy or otherwise, relatively speaking, on an index, your risk for hospitalization and death is dramatically higher.
But that's absolute versus relative risk reduction. My risk right now, talking to you, is much lower of dying than of being on the highway right now. Does that mean I don't drive on the highway right now?
Yeah, but no, come on. Being on the highway is not a communicable disease. There's not transmissible.
Okay, we're just talking about relative risk. Yes, of course. Yes, I know it's not a perfect comparison. But the survival rate for COVID for the non-elderly population, I pulled up these numbers again for my articles, and it was 99.965% for people 0 to 59. And the people that did die of COVID and were hospitalized, they were almost entirely the ones with multiple comorbidities, had
And
obesity.
what percentage let me ask a different question to put it a different way. What percentage of people, any age for that matter, have comorbidities and don't know it?
What percentage of, say it again?
What percentage of people have comorbidities and don't know it?
I don't know.
I don't know the exact percentage, but it's certainly far greater than zero. I had AFib. I just had an ablation, right? So you can tell your cardiologist about, I had a PFA and so far so good. But most people, I didn't know I had AFib forever until I drank too many drinks, energy drinks, right? And then it kicked in and I was like, oh, what the fuck is this? But I had no idea. My uncle had no idea. There's people who fall over and have strokes. I know several people who had strokes that ended up because of AFib that they didn't know they had. And so it's a comorbidity that as you get older, and I'm not talking 60, I'm talking 30, that there's a lot of shit you don't know you have. There are people who fall over dead with, thickened walls of their atria, whatever, right? And so it's hard to distinguish. It's hard to do a risk analysis, because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to do a risk analysis, right? You're trying to say that the risk level is greater for a vaccinated kid who's healthy than someone who's not. But it's impossible to discern who is completely healthy and who is not. It's impossible. People don't even know it about themselves.
But there are some good indicators that show that.
No, there's no way to know. That's why nobody dies healthy, right? We all have something. And there's a lot of people who die before they should because of the some things they don't know. You maybe have read about all the women now who are finding out that they have cancer, and the numbers of cancers in kids. How old are you, Rav?
24.
Okay. The number of cancers in kids, in your age group is skyrocketing. And there's no proactive test to know. None.
Yeah. Some people attribute it to environment, toxins, diet, mRNA vaccines. Some people say.
I don't know about mRNA. Yeah. I don't know about the vaccines. Well, whatever you attributed to, right? You don't know. The individual doesn't know. And so when you put your co-founder as having all these comorbidities, not having comorbidities, it's hard to know.
Sure, but that doesn't mean you take an experimental gene therapy that's been rushed through emergency use authorization. That doesn't mean that.
Okay, RFK Jr.
Okay. The study, you can read it by Freeman and colleagues. I'll email it to you. Okay. And last thing on that, that's on the 1-800 serious adverse events. Okay. Other vaccines on the market, which some people also dispute, but putting that aside, are serious adverse event rates of 1 per million or 1 in 100,000, 1 in 500,000. Other vaccines, like the swine flu vaccine, it was withdrawn in 1976 because of a 1 per 100,000 rate of Guillain-Barré syndrome. And other vaccines have been pulled for far lower rates of serious adverse events. But this one is showing 1 in 800, and the study authors they said this is the first and only rock solid paper reanalyzing Pfizer and Moderna's own clinical trials. Okay.
So, but those clinical trials occurred prior to the first instance of COVID, right? The first the pre-mutations.
Yes, very likely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not really applicable to anything post that, right?
Well, but yeah, I mean, there's so many other factors, including the serious adverse. Yeah. What the long-term effects of the vaccine? I mean, that's also another question.
Does it use VAERS? Or no, you said it used their own data. Okay.
Yeah, and the study found that the excess risks of of adverse events of special interest exceeded the reduction in COVID-19 hospitalizations in both Pfizer and Moderna trials.
You can send it to me. I'm happy to look at it. Then what I do is I put in the name of the study and ask for people who disagree with it, and then I'll read both sides.
Sure, yeah. But your attack, when you attack Joe Rogan, you mentioned the community benefit. You want to protect grandma, which I think is totally ludicrous and doesn't make sense.
Kidding me? But that's part of being 24 years old, right? Because you worry about yourself.
No, grandma can get the vaccine.
I'm talking about grandma that you don't know. I'm talking about grandma in your own household.
Yeah, and she got the vaccine. My grandma got the vaccine.
Okay.
So
hopefully she's fine, but you still take that risk.
She's fine.
Or the grandmas, that maybe it's not that you come in close contact with. That maybe that they live in the household where taking the vaccine was frowned upon. Maybe, maybe they're an anti-vax family and you don't know it.
Okay, but if I had gotten the vaccine, I still would have gotten COVID, and I still could have passed it on to grandma.
But the chances, all the numbers are reduced.
For 1 or 2 months, they're reduced, and then after that, I can still pass it on to grandma.
Okay.
So
if it's 1 day, if it's 10 days, right? Then if you're reducing the death count, that's a positive.
But grandma's going to get COVID anyways, and she didn't.
Grandma won't necessarily get COVID. Grandma, whatever, right? We're going to go around in circles. But I get
people were going to get COVID regardless of their vaccination status. You know this.
Yeah, not necessarily, but you can still be vaccinated and still get COVID. Yes.
Yeah, most people who got vaccinated also got COVID. Some estimates show it's like 99%. Like
it's not 99%.
Pretty much
no, it's not 99%.
Pretty much everyone, unless you're inside all day, you're not in contact with other people, you're in complete lockdown mode in 2025. You likely got COVID at some point.
Not necessarily, but in any event.
Yeah, but putting aside the community benefit, though, if we just caveat that, would you still have attacked Joe Rogan for saying young people should not get vaccinated? Like, do you think for young people there was a clear benefit, putting aside protecting grandma?
Yes, absolutely.
You still think there was a clear benefit?
Yeah, based off of what I see here, and based off of the fact that you're only giving one side of the story and not saying here's the other side. But yeah, right. So we'll let ChatGPT would have criticized Joe Rogan because ChatGPT says it's a greater risk.
For people 20 to 29, the infection fatality rate was 0.003%.
Okay.
Do you know that young people routinely participate in activities with higher risks, like swimming, horseback riding?
Yep.
So should they not do those things?
One's not transmittable, the other is.
We're just talking right now about individual risk.
Communicable disease.
No, I said put aside the community benefit. We're just talking about
that. That's the whole point of getting a vaccine. There would be no need for a vaccine. There's no need for a vaccine for horse riding, right? There's need.
I'm talking about individual risk right now.
There's no such thing as individual risk for communicable disease. That's the whole point.
We just went through the protecting grandma argument. I'm saying let's put that aside. Let's talk about individual risk now.
You can't. That's like saying, some people, it's just, you can't. Like, people are going to die in car crashes, but it's not.
You just said young people had a clear benefit. So I'm talking about the clear benefit. Okay, putting aside
the clear
saving grandma.
It reduces the chance of their relatives and people that they come into contact with dying or going to the hospital. That is a benefit. So Rob, I'll ask it a different way. If you could do something that even for 60 days reduce the chance of people you came in contact with at your school or your events, would you do it?
If it didn't elevate my own risk of getting heart inflammation
your own risk
or serious adverse events, then maybe yes, I would do it.
Of a given adverse event, myocarditis, right?
If it was 0, then I probably would do it.
Okay, so your risk is 350 per million. Would you do it?
The best estimates of vaccine myocarditis was something in the range of 1 in 2,000 or 1 in 1,800 even, according to Kaiser Permanente and Hong Kong estimates.
1 in 2,000 is 500 in a million. So 500 in a million. I said 350 or 300. 500 in a million. That's your risk. 500 in a million.
And what's my risk of COVID? By that's just vaccine myocarditis. My risk is something like 1 in 800 for serious adverse events. It's likely much higher for young people.
Not buying that study at.
You can read that study, and the guy who led that study, he's a science advisor to Jay Bhattacharya, Joseph Raymond, and he would be happy to talk to you, I'm sure, about his study.
Yeah,
he'll talk to you.
I'm sure. Now, I'd rather watch him talk to all the people who disagree with him.
Sure. Why do you get one of your experts?
And they probably still have the same position for whatever reason. Neither side is changing their minds.
Why do you get your chosen expert? I'll bring Joseph Raymond, who
works at the chosen expert. That's not how science works. It's not about having chosen
the experts you talk to.
No, I don't have experts that I talk to. I haven't looked at this. Like I said, I didn't prepare for this at all. I haven't looked at this since I talked to you.
I prepared for like an hour before this. Yeah. The experts you talked to in 2021 to make your decision, I'm saying.
The NBA brought them all in, and those are the experts we listened to. I talked to a couple of people who actually worked on the vaccine, and so that's the feedback I got.
Yeah. Again, for young people, there was no clear benefit.
And I read the studies. And again, like I said, Qatar, Israel, they're not saying 1 in 800 adverse effects. And you're saying effectively that every other country on the planet is dumb.
They were completely misguided by the data. And people who authored the Great Barrington Declaration, Martin Kulldorff of Sweden, Jay Bhattacharya, he's American, Sunetra Gupta from the UK, they had a much better, and a much stronger, more rigorous analysis of the data.
I've got to go, but we'll go with that, right? That everybody else was misguided, but your chosen guys are right.
It's not that they're my chosen guys. It's that they had a better read of the data and they were vindicated.
Your read of it, because people obviously disagreed. There were a whole lot of people around the world who didn't have the same read. So, and that's okay. We're allowed. That's what makes a market, right?
Right. And so you were attacking Rogan because you felt like it was irresponsible.
Yes.
At the time. Right. Even though all the serious adverse events.
I don't remember what I said, but I don't remember what I said. I don't remember. Yeah. But yeah, if his whole thing was you shouldn't get it, I disagree.
If you're young and healthy. Yeah. Again, 1 in 800 serious adverse event rate. That's the highest adverse event rate we've seen ever, pretty much, for vaccines. So we'll send you the study.
The rest of the world disagreed because they were misguided.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's end on that because that's the perfect contrast.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks for doing this.
No, I had fun. I enjoyed it. I really did.
I'm surprised, despite our contentious debate a few years back, you said yes. So I appreciate you saying yes.
Yeah, of course. Like I said,
having a lively debate.
Yeah, and I figured it'd help your podcast, and I think I figured it would be interesting. So, and it was, and I appreciate the time.
All right. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.